There we go. Okay. Oh, Sharisa, you are like first on board, taking care of that problem. Okay, let me see. Chat. There we go. Let's turn off the ding dong. I'm a little bit early, so I am, oops, let's put that back up. Let me pin this. Let's see. Let me check. There, oh, I see Tracy. Oh, there's Tracy. Okay. I was like, okay, I'm early, but let's make sure at least some people are getting in here. All right, let me, can you hear me, Sharice? I can see you. Can you like wave at me? Okay, you can hear me. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, let me make sure. Oh, there, I see Tracy. Okay. Okay, so let me make sure we can see my desk before we get, I'm a little early because I wanted to make sure things were working correctly since I had to reboot it last time. I thought, let's make sure the tech is going to be useful today. So let's make sure, okay, so the table's working. Check, check. I need like flight checks for class to make sure everything is working. Okay, so I'm going to put this over here. We'll take the keyboard out of the way. We will have the handouts here. I'm going to pull a couple decks. How do I get my Bible Studio decks out? I don't use them as much. I love them. I do use them, but you know, these are good opportunities to pull decks out. I don't use all the time. So let's pull out some decks from their boxes. Hello, Miss Rami. Tarot Proc, and then of course my Prisma Visions and my Light Visions, which is in order, just so we can have the ghosty cards too. There we go. Hello, hello. I popped on early just in case there was any tech. So this is in order, yeah. I popped on early in case there was any tech problems again this year, this week. So everything seems to be working good, not to jinx ourselves. Hello, Ava. Good morning to you as well. Let me turn off my phone. One of the things I have learned is there is just too much tech. I feel like I get everything that can ding like silenced, and then there's some random thing that can still ding. Let's see. I don't want to mute my computer. Okay. Phone is muted. Oh wait, let's make sure it's using the right microphone. Let's make sure, yep. And hello, Alana. Let's make sure it's recording. Yes, it is recording. Look at that. I feel like, okay, we are on. I'm not going to say it. I'm going to jinx myself. Don't do it, Kelly. Don't do it. Don't say it. We will struggle the rest of the class. Oh, let me pick up my mess of decks to the side. What is this? So this is the, you know, you have those certain, well, I have those certain decks that I always keep to the side, and then sometimes, oh, that's the new Kipper. Sometimes it starts to get a little bit out of control. Okay, that. All right, so we've got decks to use today. Side decks are out. Let's start a new sticky note. I'll just stick it up there and pull it down when I need it. Oh, I feel so organized and on time this morning. It's not a normal. I'm not a person that's like always like late or anything like that. That actually stresses me out. Like I don't like being late for things. That's stressful. But I do feel like of my own causes that I'm always like, oh goodness, go, do this, this, because and it's my own causes. I was so sick, after class. I was getting over the flu part. It's just a bug that's gone all around my area. And then I went like downhill and like more like into a cold type thing. And it just ended up being like almost a wasted week. And so then the last 2 days I was like, do you know how you're just like can be so unmotivated, but it's not because you're tired. It's because there's so much. Like you feel like there's so much to do that you just can't do anything. You're just like, forget it. I just can't even function. So I literally spent 2 days like organizing every space in my apartment. I got a to-do app again. I used to always use a to-do app or like a project app. Inputted my entire life into the project app and like I am so organized, like you can't even imagine it. And so now I'm like, okay, I'm ready to face the world again. Liam is not, I love that. Liam is not Liam. Hello, Liam is not Liam.
Hey, Kelly.
Yeah.
Good morning, it's Tiffany.
Good morning, Tiffany.
Quick question. I have figured out how to make the chat when it's big small, but I have not figured out how to make the little black box go away when people like say something, because sometimes when you've got the cards out and you're describing things, somebody will say something and the black box pops up and it actually covers what you're doing. So I wondered if there was
What
a way.
system, what are you watching on? Like a computer, a tablet?
A laptop.
Laptop. So you're saying that when somebody says something, like right now, if somebody types in chat, it pops something up for you?
Yeah, there's a little black box that pops up at the bottom of the screen just above the word chat. So it blocks off half of your face when every time.
Anything. I'm on a Windows laptop. And nothing, I don't have any kind of
Oh. It
pop-up.
might not be anything. I just thought I would ask in case you were.
No, it's a good question. It's not something, I've been using Zoom a long time. It's not one of the issues we've had. Let me look in
And it's just probably more distracting with me because I don't know the cards most of the time of what you're pointing to. So I'm really
right.
focused.
Like to see it. Rami's saying here, you have to go to settings to change the chat notification. And this, oh, it's the notifications that are popping up, Rami.
Yeah,
okay.
like I see Rami, I see what you're saying right there. And in a minute, yep, now it's gone.
It's so because you've got notifications pop. You must have your chat closed so you don't see the chat.
Right.
So you might be better off opening the chat so that you don't get the pop-ups.
Oh, and putting that on the side. Yeah.
Yeah, because then it won't pop up in front of the video potentially. That because mine is not.
You're right. Okay.
I'm gonna turn chat off on my just.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was getting distracted in some conversation.
Yeah, no, that
one of the weeks was about something else, and I just was having a hard time follow. But I did do that. Now the pictures are on the side. Thank you.
You're welcome. Can somebody put something in chat just so that I can, I've got chat off. I see what she's talking about. Thank you, Chris. I don't know if you did that on purpose. Yeah. So let's just, I'm going to see if there's another option in case you just don't want to see chat, but you also don't want that to go up. So I don't know if you can you get to settings from here? I usually do, I think the settings from, let's see. Let's go to the actual Zoom thing.
Yeah, like on Zoom, I have speaker view, gallery view. And so right now, because of what you've said, I've just put the stuff off to the side.
Yeah, I
So,
think I know that that will stop the pop-ups, but I'm gonna just see if there's, let me just look one place before we get started. I'm gonna try to find this out. Settings are over here. Let me go to settings and chat. Show audio must include link, change start over person, push no. Okay, so what you could do, Tiffany, if you don't want to see chat at all and you don't want it to pop up, then you can go to your Zoom settings. So that's not in the window that we're in, but if you go to the actual Zoom app window and click on your icon in the upper left, then you can go to settings and then to chat. And if you scroll down, the push notifications, you can have all messages, only private messages, or nothing. So then you wouldn't, when you do take chat off the side, you wouldn't get those pop-up notifications, is my guess.
okay, great, thank you.
So you can try that and see. It's always good to learn something new. And Miss Rami definitely has saved us a couple times. Okay, let's put my phone over there. I used to love vibrate, but I have found that vibrations are so loud on phones now that they annoy me almost as much as the as if it was dinging. It's like, especially my family. My daughter finally got her keys to her and her boyfriend's house like late last night, and so I have a big family, and so then of course everybody has to converge upon the house to paint and do all that, which I'll be doing after class. And so my family group of ladies, sisters, nieces, gets crazy. Gets crazy. I'm going to push that over there. Okay, so we've got that at least somewhat figured out. Let me put things back here. Oh, nope, can't do that. Let me put that over here. Let me just open back up and then we will get started. Let's see. So today I'm so excited. Let's see. Well, I'm always excited to talk about tarot. Or anything divination wise. I don't know about you guys, but I do not have like people in my immediate like physical life that are interested in tarot. I have friends, yes, but I don't have people like in my normal world, in-person world, who why is this having a problem, who are interested in tarot or divination. So I have a couple sisters and I have my daughter who are interested. I like to get readings and they will tolerate a degree of conversation but it's pretty short-lived before the eyes start glazing over. So I always quite enjoy, there we go, being able to babble to my heart's content. Same here. Yep. I think that's the case of a lot of people. Sue forces her son to listen to me. Okay. It's like, look, just give me 20 minutes to just tell you this amazing thing that I figured. And they're just like, you can just see their eyes glaze over and they're like, really, do I have to listen to this? Are we done yet? Can you just give me my reading, Mom? Just like, can you just tell me what's going on here? Okay. So to me, it's very enjoyable. All right. So I almost want to qualify this week by saying, breathe through it before we start this, okay? Remember that the purpose of this class, when you have to qualify yourself, it's never good, right? The purpose of this class is, by nature of size or how many weeks we have, is condensed. So it gets to be a lot of overload for, again, this time around, we do have a nice handful of people, which is so lovely, that are pretty new in the grand scheme of things to tarot. And so for those people who are new to tarot, things like this week, I think, can get overwhelming, or even just all of the stuff starting to pile in when you're just starting to learn the basics, and then you have a lot of extra things piled on top of it. That can be overwhelming. So just remember that you can come back to this, take what interests you, of especially the last couple of weeks, take what interests you, take what works for you, and kind of file away the other stuff to come back to. And also, we're going to talk a lot more about this next week, because we're going to talk a lot more about spreads next week. We're going to definitely go through again sort of the order of operations in working through a tarot reading. But I really look at the different ways that we can approach tarot and the different correspondences that we can put on them as tools in a toolbox, right? So every time you do a reading does not mean that you have to apply every single thing that you know about that card, that you know about how to process a tarot reading. It doesn't all have to happen every single time you do a reading. Sometimes I am just doing a quick 3-card reading. I am not looking at a ghost cards. I mean, that's a hard one for me because I'm always thinking about where it's coming from. So it's like a natural process for me, but I'm certainly not, I'm not sitting there and deliberately expanding them. I'm not necessarily looking at the hero's journey. If I'm an astrology person, I'm not necessarily looking at astrology correspondences. I'm just bam, bam, bam. Here's these 3 cards. Here's a message that comes forward. All right, I got to go about my day, right? So sometimes you're just doing a reading just to do a quick and you just need to get a quick message. You need to clarify something really quickly. And so you lay your 3 cards down and you get your message and you go about your business, right? Other times you're in a space where maybe something is going on and you really need to kind of suss out what's happening. So a lot of times then you're going to go with a larger spread. A lot of times you're going to kind of block out some time so that you can, sit there and kind of work your way through the whole reading in some way. Sometimes, like for me, I often on the full moons and the new moons, I like to do a bit more of an involved reading for myself. So there might be certain times that I'm going to go in, and then I might start to, go through and do sort of the full reading like I would do for a client. I don't always do that for myself. I just need to get the message and move. But sometimes I do. Sometimes I want to sit down and I want to get sort of that full experience of the reading. And even then, depending on what the situation is, right? Depending on what I'm trying to achieve out of this reading is going to depend what tools I pull out of my toolbox, right? If I am really focused on here and now, like there is a situation that I need to focus on and I need to be fully present in right here, right now. I really don't care about what happened in the past. I can't go there. I really don't care about what's going to happen moving forward. I've got to analyze the situation now. I may not look as much or care as much about what cards, ghost cards, and what comes before, what comes after, where is it at in the grand scheme of things. I may not care so much about those things. I may be in a complicated situation where I know that the past is impacting things. Everything that's happening now is really going to make a difference moving forward. So then I've got to really pay attention to that linear. Where am I at in the grand scheme of things? Where is this coming from? Where is this all heading? And then I might start to pull out more tools in my toolbox, right? So if you think about all the things, and many of you have been reading, obviously long before that, and have acquired your own tools, things that work for you, things that you like to use in reading. If you really think about that as a magic box, if that's more, exciting than a toolbox, you have your box full of these different things. But I think that a lot of times when people are newer to readings, and or the opposite, when you've been reading for a long time and you've accumulated so many great ideas from people, that when you sit down to do a reading, you can almost get paralyzed by the amount of things that you could do, that you could pull out, when you may be overkill. Like you may be throwing everything but the kitchen sink at the reading, and it doesn't really need that. And so just think about these different things as options to use in a reading when it makes sense and when it's going to help you to achieve the message that you're going to achieve. So and we talked about this, I think, a little bit in the first class, and we will go over this again next week. But for me, any reading, whatever, whether it's tarot, oracle, runes, whatever divination system you're doing, when you sit down to do a reading, there are 2 things that are essential to happen. One is you need to have figure out why are you doing this reading? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Are you really overwhelmed and you just need some support? Okay, well, go to a deck, go to a reading that is going to offer you support, but maybe it's not going to challenge you, because we don't always need to be challenged. Sometimes we just are in a situation where I need a hug, I need some support, I need my ancestors to come forward, not to lecture me, but to, you know, to support me in what I'm trying to do. Like sometimes we're not in the space to do shadow work, or we're not in the space to get called out. So if you know that what you're trying to achieve is to get support, then you're going to pick a deck that feels supportive. You're going to pick a reading that feels supportive. You're not going to probably deep dive. You're just going to get that supportive message. Whereas if you are, you know, in a situation where you've got to figure some things out, there's a lot of stuff going on, you've got to figure it out. Okay, now you're going to pick a bigger spread. You're going to make sure you have positions, and we're going to talk about this next week, but you're going to make sure that the reading it's going to itself is going to fulfill what are you actually trying to achieve, and then formulate your question. So you need to know, be honest with yourself about what you're really trying to achieve. If you're just trying to achieve the cards to support your decision you've already made, you know, be honest with yourself and say, okay, that's what, you know, I'm trying to see, I've made this decision already. You know, kind of where is this going to go? How can I best work, you know, work with what I've got, because this is what I'm doing. And versus asking a question of should I do X, Y, and Z when you've already decided what you're going to do and you're really just looking for sort of support in that decision. So learning to be really honest with yourself about what are your expectations, what do you want to get out of this reading, and then format your question to support that what you're trying to achieve. And then again, pick the tools and pick the bits and bobs and the ways of looking at the reading that are going to support what you're trying to achieve. You don't have to throw everything at it. And now I know I'm off on a rabbit trail. And we're going to readdress this later. But I think it's important. I know that this, I love this stuff, but I know that this one in the past can be a little bit overwhelming just to work through this. And so it's very possible that you'll never use this after, like, oh, that's really interesting. It's an interesting way to process it, but it's not for me. And that's true of everything, right? Your goal is, as a tarot reader, is yes, to always be constantly learning, but it's to filter things out like that. You know, there's a lot of things. I take astrology. I use astrology in practice. I don't use it for tarot readings. It doesn't really add anything. If I'm going to do astrology, I'm going to do astrology. And so I don't add astrology into my tarot readings. Many people really lean into astrological associations with tarot. That's a big part of the way in which they read tarot, and that's fantastic, right? They get what they need to get out of it by really leaning into astrological correspondences, which does nothing to it doesn't support for me my tarot reading. And so, you know, we all have different tools, and that's what makes us individual readers. So don't get stressed, and, you know, use the tool that is appropriate. Okay. Let's see. So the other thing I want to briefly talk about, let's pause here. I'm going to go hands down for a second, because in some ways this can be an answer to reversals. So I want to pause for a minute and talk about reversals, because we really haven't talked. I mean, we've talked briefly about it, but what if the querent is really into astrology? Can it be helpful to look for influences in the reading then? Yes and no. You know, if you're reading for a client, right, that client has come to you to get your particular brand of readings, right? And so it's more important that you answer the question in the way that best suits your reading style, right? They're not there, or they shouldn't be there, right, to sort of lean into their own. Now, they may be attracted to you, and they may get a reading from you because your styles might mesh, right? But if I don't normally use astrology and tarot, but I know that my client is really into astrology, that doesn't influence, personally for myself, that doesn't influence me to bring those things into the reading, because it's not, they're there to get a reading from me. And if I start doing things that aren't my normal, that's going to pull me out of my rhythm and my routine of getting messages. So I don't tend to change my reading style per what the client is interested in. Now, let's say that the client comes to me and says, you know, I do work with tarot a lot in astrology, and I've been having this particular, you know, issue with a person who is a Leo or something like that. And, you know, they may have some specific astrological thing that they bring up, and something that comes up in a reading that I know is associated with, traditionally associated. And again, this becomes complicated because astrology, there is not a one way to read astrology and tarot. If you read a number of books about astrology and tarot, you will see a number of ways to correlate those. And so there isn't a grand Bible. Now, if you're a Golden Dawn person that follows the traditions of the Golden Dawn, that's a way that you can follow it. But there's other ways in which people associate tarot or astrology to tarot. And so there isn't a one way, but there are some traditional ways to look at those. And so, you know, if I know that they're really looking at Aries energy and the Emperor comes up, is that going to be on the front of my head because they've said that? Yeah. And so that I might mention it, but I don't tend to change my way of reading for what the client's interested in, because that would just interfere with my flow of reading, if that makes sense. So I think it's more important to if astrology is important to you and is interesting to you, then it's important then to take that time to lean into, say, okay, how do I use astrology with tarot? Where do I land with this? You know, doing that kind of work, and really making that your correspondence. And then that's probably something that's always going to impact your reading style versus when a querent or client is into that. Chris says, if your only tool is a hammer, all your problem looks like nails. Yes. It's always good to have options. Yep. And it's always important that you don't have to do them all at the same time, because I will say that for my personal readings, 90% of the time, they're quick and dirty. They're just like, I just need to get a message and move. And that, some of that can be because as a professional reading, I'm doing long involved readings all the time. And so, you know, sometimes for ourselves, we're just like, okay, let's get what I need to get. So that can be a side effect of being a professional reader, but it's not always. Like, that's just kind of my style in general. I'm not a long-winded reader in a natural sense. And so when I just need to get the messages and I don't have to talk it all out, right? They go much quicker, and they're just more like, okay, what do I got to do? What do I got to hear? Yes, Chris is on a campaign to get me to do a basic astrology class. It would be a basic astrology class for readers, not astrology. I'm not an astrologist. Okay, so let's that was a good question. So let me shift this down here. I lost my OBS. There we go. Let's go down here for a minute. And let's just talk for a second about reversals. So what deck do I want to do the terrible thing of getting my deck mixed up? Because I'm going to have to re-put it all right. I love, this is one of my favorite Two of Swords. Today is Bala Studio Day, just to pull them out there. So reversals are a tool in your toolkit, and they are not for everybody, and you are not going to be a better reader because you use reversals. You are not going to be a better reader if you don't use reversals. It is simply a personal preference, right? You will find people who say if you do not use reversals, you are not really reading tarot. And you will have people who say the opposite. If you are using, what do I hear? Like sometimes people will say, if you don't use reversals, then your reading is always just going to be fluffy and light. There's never going to be any shadow. You know, again, people clump together and decide that my way is the right way and the only way, right? Your way is the right way for you. And it doesn't really matter what everybody else is doing, right? So you can do either of these. Excuse me. if you are new to tarot, I would try it. This is the exploratory time, right? This is a time to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And you're not going to know if you don't give it a go. So I spent some time using reversals in a couple of different ways. So what a reversal means is that if you're just shuffling your card and you don't do anything to change it or to skew it, obviously when you lay your cards down, your cards are going to come up face up because you haven't done anything to cause there to be a reversal, right? So it has to be a deliberate thing. If you are going to use reversals, you've got to shuffle your deck in such a way that that it causes reversals for you. Sometimes people will take the deck, like just kind of split it in half and rotate one of the halves, and then riffle shuffle that in, or however you shuffle, right? You're going to mix that in, and usually I'll do a little bit of a mix of that, right? Because I do have systems that I use. I read Deste. Deste is a system that uses reversals, and I use reversals for that. I use reversals with the Cosmovision Oracle because that's a system built on reversal. So I do use reversals when it's something that's built into the system. I don't use reversals for tarot because why? Because for me, the progression of the 78 cards and the use of numbers that are active, passive, kind of shook up, evening out, the rhythm of tarot for me is very balanced all by itself. When you use a number system, when you're paying attention to odd and even numbers, when you're paying attention to shake up numbers versus balancing numbers, there's a balance to the system by itself without reversing them. I also believe that in every card that comes up, we should be thinking about light and shadow in that card, not just because it turns upside down, but because it's inherent in the card to look at both sides. I'm also a reader who uses positions most of the time. So I do work a lot with spreads that have positions in them. And so if I am looking for the shadow of a situation, that's going to be built into a position in the spread. So those things, those are, I guess, the main thing. The other thing is that I have a very Libra brain, or I have my own version of a very Libra brain, in that when I go to do a reading and the cards are reversed, it bothers my brain, right? So the point of doing a reading is that we sink into whatever space it is that we read. Some people are connecting to guides. Some people are going inward and connecting to the collective unconscious. Some people like me are dropping into the web. Whatever it is that is your thing that connects you into that reading space. So when I go to do a reading, I want to be in that zone to do a reading. And when cards are upside down on the table, tarot cards in particular, my brain is fixated on the fact that I want to turn them right side up. So all it's doing is interrupting my flow, and that's fine. That's the way my brain works. And so I work with what my brain, the issues of my own brain, right? You may have a brain that loves having the cards flip-flopped around and understanding that. And there's different ways that you can approach reversals. So a lot of people assume that you can only use reversals. Let's see if we get any reversals here. No, of course not. So let's do this, right? So if you've got them shook up, you're going to have, so I need to riffle shuffle this. Obviously this deck was not mixed up good enough, but what you're going to do is you're going to get some cards that are upright and some cards that are reversed, and there's different ways that you can look at this. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that all of a sudden it's the negative or the opposite of whatever the card originally meant. So if the Knight of Cups means that you're going out in search of the Holy Grail, you're going out to connect to other people in a way that is going to support the greater good. If that's your upright meaning of the cups, then having it reverse means that you're not, you're going out for selfish reasons, you're going out into the world in a negative capacity in some way, and you're skewing the meaning of the card to the negative, right? So some people approach reversals that way. That's how you know whether a card is going to be a negative version of itself. Now, the reverse of that being that if, let's say, it's the devil, which has a negative connotation in its upright form in terms of you've abdicated your power, if it's reversed, it means that you're holding on to your power, you've recovered your power in some way, right? So you're looking at the reverse of the card. Some people use, and the way that I probably use reversals the longest in testing out, do I want to use reversals, is you can look at it as an exclamation point. The energy has flopped, right, has flipped, and there's a reason for that. So I want to pay special attention to the cards that are reversed, because it indicates there is a, yes, I tried to say the names of the deck. This is the Tarot of Prague. We're having a Baba Studio day, so I can get them out and they can have some fresh air. Wait, no, that's not. No, I take that back. This, I'm looking at, where's the corners? No, this is the Victorian Romantic Tarot. Sorry. This is one of my favorite decks. I do love this deck so much. No problem, Nan. I do try to say that because people do like to know. So think about it if you're doing a casting. So if you're doing, well, if I do like a token casting or charm casting, and or even a rune casting, and the runes or the charm or whatever it is face down, that doesn't mean it's something negative to me. It means that that energy is in some way needing to be opened up and brought, kind of brought into life, it's not fully into the situation. So you can look at reversals the same way, where it just lets you know that that energy in some way is disrupted or it is highlighted. So you're using it like there's an exclamation point on the top of every reversed card. And so, that's a way to look at it. That works for me in charms and runes, because I'm needing to pay attention to what's like coming into focus out of a lot. I'm not ever putting all 78 cards on. Yeah, thank you, Miss Mendy. I had the Victorian Romantic for a long time in I think it was a Russian version. And I promised myself if it ever came back into stock, I would, because I love the deck. It's so stunning. And I said if it ever comes back into print, I would purchase it. And so it came back into print a couple years ago. Baba Studios, you will see, they are very collectible in terms of people that collect. And so they can get very expensive when they're out of print. But it is apparently coming back into print. So don't go spending an enormous amount of money, because it is one that they are bringing back into print. And it is a stunning deck. Like, this is a deck I would repurchase if I lost it, because I do love this deck a lot. Okay, so yeah, so you can use it as an emphasis, right? That the most often you see people, especially if you look in your guidebook and it has a reverse meaning, it's very often the negative or the shadow side of that particular card. So that is one way to.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Siri,
could you please repeat it?
Stop. Nobody's talking to you, Siri. I don't think I said anything that sounded like Siri, but apparently I did. And then there's obviously everybody's going to have individual ways of approaching reversals. The only way that you are going to know if reversals sync with you is if you give it a try. Take one of your decks, mix them up. I would say if it's the first time that you are using a deck for reversals, I like to put them on the floor and give it a big old wash, like just wash it all up and pull it in, right? Because my favorite way, I'm generally using reversals in smaller decks. So Deste is a poker card size deck. I have a mini version that I made of the Cosmovisions Oracle, which is small. And so I just like to put it on the table and do a good wash so that I get a really good mix and randomized flipping upside down. So that first time that you take a deck out of being in order and then you go to do it, I just would put it on the floor, give it a good wash, pull it in, and then, you know, kind of do your thing. Some people that use reversals will always put their deck back upright when they are done with the reading, so that the next time they do a reading, it's a fresh reversing things. I wouldn't probably do that. Just knowing myself, but I do know from I think it was the last class, we had quite a few people who at the end of a reading put their cards completely back into order. That is a thing people do. I'm really, you know, I pop it in the box and move on, right? So yeah, you'll have to kind of play around with what you do with that, but give it a try. If you've never tried, Deste is very good at showing you where there's stumbling blocks. It's one of the best systems for really showing you where there can be potential problems in the future and what would be causing them, which allows you to avoid them. So it's extremely good at that, but it is very hard right now. From what I understand, I have lots of people message me about Deste, you're trying to get a deck or thinking that my Deste reading, can they buy the deck instead of get the reading? And I'm like, no, no, you may not. I'm sorry, but it is right now. So it does seem to be more difficult to get a hold of than it was years ago, where you could generally find it. Sorry, Deste, we can rabbit trail, because this is rabbit trail very quickly. Deste is a system that came out of Turkey and Greek. So there are two versions. This is the Turkish version. You can tell because you have katina on the back doubled, so it's reversible. The Greek version has just one bust of katina on the back. The Turkish version doesn't have, they're same exact cards, but there's some shifts so that there's no nudity in the Turkish card. And it's basically like a mix of Lenormand. So you have a set of cards that are like very much like Lenormand, some identical Lenormand cards, some different ones, but it's very much a fortune telling style system. And then there is a set of, so it's like you take the tarot court cards and you combine it with a Lenormand Kipperesque type style deck. Very elementally based, expanded, so you don't just have the kings, queens, princesses, and princes, but you also have horses and gins and the element cards themselves. So it's kind of a hybrid system. So it's like a mix. But the difficulty is that it comes out of Turkey and Greek. There's no English text. I have two Greek friends who have used Deste for a long time, and so they went through with me so I could and translated some things, and you know, so now I have I've been using it for a while now. But there's not a lot of English resources out about it, unfortunately. So that's what Deste is. Sorry. The only reason I mention it is that this is a system that it's built into the system to use reversals. And so you would be hampering your reading by not using the reversals. So, I don't know, like it would be interesting to know like when the first time people talked about using reversals in tarot. I'm not entirely sure. Rami does not need, they're very hard to find. So it may, you know, not be a struggle for you because they are difficult to find. I had originally gotten mine from Turkey, from Amazon, but it took forever to get here from Turkey. And then my Greek, I have a friend in Greece, and she sent me the Greek version of it, which I am hoarding because this one is getting really eaten up. So, okay, yeah. Anyway, so you may just by nature of there not being a lot of resources and it's hard to find the deck, it may not suck you in. Raph asked, can the reversal of a negative card also be negative? So again, let's say we take, and again, I have a hard time, like I don't look at cards as being inherently negative. You know, I know that people do say the Tower would be seen as a negative card. I don't see the Tower as a negative card. So reversing it might say that I'm going to really struggle with that. You know, the Tower card to me says, something has happened that has shaken things up outside of my control. I just have to live with the consequences here. It just happened. And the power of the Tower card is to tell me to rebuild in a more balanced way, a more healthy way, pick up the pieces and keep moving, right? So if that was reversed, I would see that as being that I'm really struggling, I guess, with that. Again, this is just personally, this is the first thing that comes to my head. If I were to reverse the Tower, for me personally, it would say I'm really struggling. The pieces are still, because it's upside down, pieces are still falling off. Things are still burning. I've not got my feet back under me in that situation yet. And so I need to kind of do the work to get myself righted. When the Devil card comes up, again, people would see the Devil card as negative. The Devil card for me isn't negative because it's reminding you to take your power back. That's a very positive thing, to say, look, you've abdicated your power in some way, get it back. So if that was reversed, then, you know, maybe for me, that would say that I'm really struggling to get that back. Maybe that's getting really rooted in where I'm not, it's going to be harder for me to pull my power back in because it's really entangled. There's no, in my opinion, right, there's no right or wrong way to read a reversal. It's what makes sense to you. If you see that, but what I would recommend is that you start from, how would you read that card normally? So if I have the 10 of Pentacles here in reverse, and I say to myself, okay, well, upright, the 10 of Pentacles is 10. Number 10 is a completion. There is a completion or a full cycle shift of something coming into fruition in the physical world. The 10 of Pentacles is also about legacies. It's about having done something that is going to continue on and move forward. So you can literally talk to yourself through that and say, okay, that's what the 10 of Pentacles means to me, or whatever that means to you. And then think about what that means reverse. So what I have built is not, it hasn't gone into that rhythm of that legacy energy. There's been a block maybe to that completion. If a 10 is in reverse, that 10 is about something coming fully into completion and it's upside down, then maybe something right there at that end is kind of blocking the way for this to completely finish that cycle in some way. So I would always say, start with, how do you read the card normally? And then think about, what would that mean if that's interrupted in some way? If the energy of that is interrupted. Now, one of the things that I like about reversals, and I did spend a lot of time working with reversals to determine my, years ago, to determine my reading style, right? One of the things that I think is really beneficial about reversals is that in some ways, I love casting. So I do a lot of casting. I do charm casting, rune casting, all the castings that you can cast. I love to cast because why? Because I don't believe that energy sits in nice, neat little positions, right? They don't line up nice and neat and beautiful card layouts. Energy is messy. Lives are messy. Situations are messy. And so when I cast all my charms onto the table, I see the way in which energy is mixing up and interacting and touching and clumped over here. And I can see the energy of the situation very clearly. And so that's why I go to casting over tarot or over a card system. So reversals in many ways, I think, are a way in which you can bring some of that into a card system, in the sense that you can see, where is energy being interrupted, where is energy being blocked, in a very visual way. So I actually think that it can be super beneficial if that's something that works for you. So, and the only way that you are going to know whether you like to work with reversals or not is going to be trying it, and you have to do it more than once, right? So let me say, when I say try something, this doesn't mean do it once and say, no. I don't remember how I did it, but I know I had set a timeline, and it was quite long, and it was months of working it with one way. I just doing reversals in general, I didn't quite match with just being the negative of the reverse. So then I did a few months of doing it with the exclamation point that's calling attention to that card. And you know, and eventually I figured out that it wasn't necessary for me. It really didn't work for my reading style, but I really did work with it a while to get a good feel for it. And so I would, you know, if you have multiple decks, most of us do, not all of us, but most of us have multiple decks, take one of your decks and have it be your reverse deck, so that maybe every so often you pull that deck out, do a reading for yourself, and see how it goes. Is it flowing? Is it clicking it all for you? And the answer may be no. And then you're like, okay, now I know that this just doesn't work for me. But the answer also might be like, you know what, I kind of like this. Maybe there are situations where energy is really complicated, where it might be great to pull out that deck that's my reversal deck, so that I can really sort of get at what's going on in the energy of the situation. So it might be one of those tools that you bring out sometimes when it makes sense to what you're trying to achieve in the reading, right? So that's what reversals are. Some guidebooks, when you get a deck, some guidebooks will show a reversed meaning for their cards. Some of them won't. It just depends on, I think, the person who's made the deck, whether they've made it with that intention, whether that's something that they that's important to them or not. I think, and I scroll back up here because I also saw Ellen says, I find it hard to read reverse with cards I don't know very well. And that's there's two, that makes me think of two things. Number one, if you're new to tarot, I truthfully would be working with upright deck until you feel really comfortable with what those cards mean to you at their foundation, right? You want to have a good foundation of what the cards mean before you try to look at the card upside down. I think that's just, I think that just makes sense in a learning level. Get your foundation strong and then you start to play. Also, use a deck like Helen, so sorry, Ellen was saying that I would use a deck that you feel most comfortable with, right? You already kind of got a feel for that deck really well. And so it's going to be a lot easier for you to do that. There is a deck called, I'm pulling back into years of my brain now. There's a deck called, I think, Tarot Revelation. I'll have to write it down to see if I can find it. That has the image. It shows the reversal. So if it's reverse, it changes the image to sort of lean into that energy of what the card would be. Revelation. Thank you, Raph. Revelations Tarot. And I don't know if I still have that or not. I'll have to see if I can dig it up. But so what it has is almost like a playing card deck, where you've got the image that when you flip it, let's say it's this card, you would see the Knight of Cups and you would still see another, half of the Knight of Cups here in reverse, but maybe the imagery is more in alignment with the reversal meaning. And then when it's upright, it's the imagery reflects that upright imagery. So it allows you to sink into what that card could mean regardless of what side it comes up. So that's an interesting deck if you're playing around with reversals. And Ava says there's an app for it. And that's a great, apps are a great way to like test out a deck if you don't know if you want it or like it. Thank you, Miss Jamie. Let me click it just to see if that's the one I was thinking about. Maybe. My computer says, no, you're doing too many. Yes. That's Revelations Tarot by Zach Wong. And so, yeah, that definitely does a great job at letting you visualize the reversals. Now, if I remember correctly, again, this has been years, I believe it probably leans more towards that opposite being negative of the card, what the card would mean in its upright version. But I think I might have a walkthrough on that. If I do, it's like back in the back of the beyond of all my walkthroughs, but I might have a walkthrough of it. Let me see what Lenore said here. there is an exercise you do in art classes where you turn an image upside down and draw it. Yes, yes, I have done that before because it forces the artist to follow what they see, the line of the image. Yes, we do this for writing as well, where you read backwards so that you get yourself out of the context of the sentence, because we fill in a lot of gaps with, our brain just sees what it wants to see, and reading backwards allows you to edit in a much better way. I always did that with papers, and yes, I do that, and I try to do that a lot with my art, where even if it's not like it's supposed to be in a specific way, but in the midst of drawing or painting, I like to be flipping it upside down and getting a different perspective on it. Yeah, no, that's a great example there. Okay. It did not. Miss Mendy said she was doing that exercise in a drawing class and drew the rabbit upside down. It did not look like a rabbit when she was finished, apparently. That's pretty funny. Yeah, I guess I've never done it where I don't do the whole painting or drawing upside down, but I'm always flipping it because it does kind of let you know when you've got perspective skewed. Some of my paintings started out in one direction, and when it ended up, I ended up leaving it upright in that upside down state. It is good to continually rotate. But reading, yeah, we taught that in, I taught a lot of how to write research papers, how to write essays in college, workshops. And that's one of the best ways. And I'm telling you, I don't care how great you are. In fact, sometimes the better editor that you are, the more you need to do this, because you do really fill in, and you see it and you hear it the way that it is right, even though it's not right on paper. The brain is an amazing thing. And so to read your paper backwards forces you to really pay attention sentence by sentence, versus the flow of things, which causes you to mess things up. So yeah, changing your perspective on many different things can be helpful. So you may find that you absolutely love this. And again, I think that you're only going to know it if you really give it a good try, and that maybe the way to do that is to just pick out a deck, keep it reversed, just like you have a deck right now that you maybe are keeping in order for ghost cards. Have a deck that you're going to use for reversals, and give it a try it out and see how it goes for you, and give it a good try, because at first it's going to feel weird, but then give it a little bit time to see whether it turns into something that works for you or not. I would say that if you're not a person that uses a lot of spreads, that I would almost say that then it would open up because spreads give you positions that allow you to look at it. Is this in reverse? Is this in support? Is this in an obstacle? It gives you another lens to read the card through. And if you don't have that, because you're not a spread person, because not everybody's spread people, then I could see where reversals would be important, right? Because it does show you where there are disruptions, where there are obstacles, without having a position that says for you to do that. Okay. The reason though, we're going to talk, you kind of pause for a minute to talk about reversals, is because what we're going to talk about today in some way allows you to use reversals, but not having reversals. So let's jump into, now that we've qualified this topic to death, let's let me be smart about this. Face only. Let me go back over here. Miss Jamie, did you cut your hair? It looks quite lovely today. Not that it doesn't look lovely otherwise, but it looks different. Or maybe it's growing out. I don't know. Ignore me. You probably should as well. It looks good wet. There you go. See, Tiffany noticed it too. It wasn't just my hair's wet too, because I can't blow dry my hair. Okay, let's see. Now that we're all staring at Jamie's hair. Sorry, let's just put a big exclamation point on Jamie. Okay, what am I trying to do here? I'm getting confused. Okay, let's share this. And Let me get chat back up. Although, as I've said, I try to not pay too much attention to chat in this format. And we're going to do, again, as always, we are going to apply this, on the table as well. So I just want to make sure that we can kind of step our way through this, and then we'll apply it on the table, so that we can try to make some sense of it. So we've talked about, let me go back here so this doesn't distract me. We've talked about, in terms of the intermediate part here, we've talked about the understanding of the numbers, right? And the way that the numbers cause a progression. We see the even and odd. We see the way that the cards are interacting, right? Because the whole goal of this intermediate part, if you think about beginning tarot, we're trying to get the base meanings down. And we do a little bit of this. We want to understand the numbers. We want to understand the elements. We're kind of do the basics of all of this. But very often when you're first learning to read tarot, there's a place in which you know the basic meanings of the cards, but they kind of stand in isolation, and little like soldiers line up in a row, and you're just kind of da 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 da, and you're kind of reading them as like isolated cards. And one of the humps to get over with reading tarot or any system is where we're moving from that point in which we understand the basics, we know what the cards mean individually, but when we put them all on a table, we're really just seeing these as these individual cards sitting individually on the table. And so the second part, the goal is to try to really think about the ways in which they interact with each other, because cards are, in my opinion, right? So the way that I approach readings is about energy of a situation. When we put cards on the table, we are trying to get a visual representation of what's going on in the situation. What do we need to know in that particular situation right now? And we're seeing an expression of energy on the table, right? So that we can start to kind of figure our way through the situation and kind of untangle knots and sort of figure out what's happening. So it's a visual representation. All divination, in my personal practice, all divination is putting a visual representation of energy on the table. So energy, as I just said with casting, energy doesn't lay in nice, neat boxes in life. It's very messy. It's very tangled up. And we can use that energy, right, to sort of untangle and or support or do what we want to do with it. I don't know if any of you have watched I'm getting this visual, so I'm just going to do a mini rabbit trail, but read the books because the books are better. But I don't know if any of you have read the book. Oh my goodness, now I just blanked on it. Oh no, Discovery of Witches. There we go. The book Discovery of Witches is fantastic. I don't like the TV show as much. Some people love it. I don't like the two main characters, in my opinion, have like no energetic charisma to each other at all. But if you've seen I still watch it because I love the books. And I will say the first book was good. The second book, not so good. The latest book really kind of went back full circle to really feeling fantastic again, but this is not a book review. Anyways, there is, I work with knot magic. So one of my primary, magic things that I do is knot based, which is a very traditional, there's lots of traditions around knot magic. But what I loved when I first read this book was that they pulled out, historically they've gone and done their homework and they've used some ideas of knot magic that certainly came out of the Anglo-Saxon and English magic. And other places as well. I'm rambling. My point is that there is a point. So she's learning how to like do her you know, she's trying to learn how to do her magic. I'm not going to give away the story, but she's trying to learn how to do her magic. And so there's a scene in the television shows where they're visual, you know, because it's, you know, wonderful thing of television nowadays, you can see like the energy that's all around her, and she's manipulating the energy because you know, she's doing not magic energetically. So people who use not magic, you are using a physical rope to do not, but obviously that is just standing in for the energy that you might be manipulating. But in the case of the television show, you can literally watch like her manipulate energy around her. And I just loved that scene. I thought it was absolutely amazing to, you know, it's a practice I practiced for a very long time. And so like to see like a visual representation of your practice like that was really exciting to be able to see it. But I do believe that that's what we're doing when we're putting cards on the table, is that we're reading energy. We're seeing it, we're visually seeing like those strands of, and they were calling on like, okay, here's earth energy and here's, you know, I'll see if I can find a clip. And it's not on a channel. I think it's not even on a channel. Like I think I had to pay $5 and then like bust through the whole thing. I don't remember. But sometimes on YouTube you can find it. I'll see if I can find the scene. Not Discovery Witches. Maybe that will be enough. I'll see if I can find the scene and send a link to it. My guess is I'll probably be able to find something. Sorry, knots as in tying knots. Sorry, yes, yeah, that doesn't make sense, does it, Rap? I know I'm rabbit trailing. My point is, for those of you who have seen this, know what I'm talking. Or have you read the book? The book, again, the books are far better in my opinion than the television show, but that I did really love. Like it gave me goosebumps to kind of see, because they were calling on earth and and so you could visually see like these threads of energy that are all around us, right? It's why most people work with divination, because they understand that everything around them is about energy. And yeah, the Audible, and it's a good reader on Audible as well. Yeah, I love the Audible. That's the one I listen to. So I know we rabbit trail, but that's okay. I do have a point here. My point is that when we are doing readings, we're trying to suss out the energy of a situation. And so seeing the way that these energies are interacting can really up your reading game, so to speak, right? Because instead of having like, okay, here's this card and it says this, here's this card and it says this, here's this card and it says this, that's great. And that's where we start. And sometimes that's what we come back to when it's a muddle of energy. We want to kind of step back into our basics and then start to weave from there, right? And so, what we want to do is, and so the whole purpose, I'm sorry, I rabbit trailed myself out of cohesiveness. The purpose of these classes, such as looking at the ghost cards and looking at the journey of the major arcana, is to see in which the cards are talking and interacting with each other. They don't stand on an island of themselves. They are part of this energetic movement that is the foundation of tarot, which is what makes tarot so beautiful. And it's what makes tarot still relevant today, beyond just being beautiful cards and a place in which an artist can do 78 works of art, right? Minus all of that wonderfulness, the system of tarot still piques people's interest, and people still pull out a tarot deck all of this time later, because that structure and that flow and that communication works, right? We go back to what works. And so we want to fully like have the communication. That's the whole point of this part of the class, is to see the way that the cards are interacting. So we've looked at numbers with the ghost cards. We've looked at the major arcana and that sort of flow of story that comes with the major arcana. And so then today we're going to be looking at the elemental energy, because I can only teach what I do. And for me, the primary parts of tarot that I lean into are the numbers and the elements, right? So go back to the beginning tarot, the first class, we are looking at understanding what is the number, which is an inherent part of tarot, and what is the suit, and combining those. And in tarot, in a modern context, that is elements, right? There are very few decks, unless it's a straight up pip deck. There are very few modern decks in which elements are not an integral part of the minors, right? And so now we're going to be looking at the way in which those elements are combining and talking to each other in today's class. So here's my caveat here, right? And if you've taken other classes with me, you know that I say this about every system. Whether something is fortunate or unfortunate, that is a term certainly out of geomancy, right? Whether something strengthens or weakens something, whether something is a friend or an enemy, whether something is supportive or unsupportive, whether something is light or shadow, positive or negative, however you want to label those, are relative to the situation at hand. I really feel like if we just memorize this or wrote it down and put it in front of us on every reading, it's so important. It is so easy to fall into what a card being negative or positive, a card being light or shadow, a card being fortunate or unfortunate, a symbol being this, a symbol being that. It may have an inherent sense of those things, but none of it matters outside of the situation at hand. So if I am doing a reading and I have been stuck for a long time, I feel like I am unmotivated, I am exhausted, I am overwhelmed, I am stuck in a situation. Trust me, as a professional reader, the amount of readings that I get of people being stuck in a situation and needing to get out of that feeling of being stuck is very high. It's a very common modern question that I personally get a lot. And so if that's what's on the situation at hand, and the Tower card comes up, that's actually a positive card. If you are feeling stuck and the Tower card shows up, we know that a shakeup, a breaking up of this energy is about to occur or is occurring. And that's actually something to be happy about, right? It's good to see the Tower show up when you are in a position of being stuck. Now, if you are in the midst of chaos, right, and things, you need to be stabilized, you're feeling scattered, you're feeling like all of your bits and pieces are floating in separate directions, you aren't tethered, you're feeling that unbearable lightness of being that I love to talk about. If you're feeling disconnected and floating about and out of no stability to be found, and the Tower comes into the reading, that's not necessarily fortunate, right? That shows that period of disconnection and shakeup is continuing on, and that is something that you wouldn't want to see in that particular reading. So whether the Tower is fortunate or unfortunate, negative or positive, really depends on the situation. And the sooner that we look at the card through the lens of the situation that we're reading for, the more beneficial our readings will become to the situation. So it's super, and in this case, and the reason why I really bring this caveat up here is that there are some older systems that really lean into fortunate, unfortunate to a very restrictive level that can make those, in my opinion, that can make them less useful in the moment, right? And what we're going to talk about today is a traditional way of working with elemental energy, but if you apply it religiously, if you apply it in a very rigid manner and not take the situation at hand into account, I don't find it to be that useful because it's going to cause really rigid readings. So it's important to understand and pay attention to what is the situation, and is this energy makeup going to be beneficial or not beneficial to that situation at hand. So I think we always just need to come back to that reminder of ourselves. So when we see a card, don't instantly say it's the Tower, ugh, or it's the Devil, ugh, or even the Judgment card, which is one of the best cards in the deck, in my opinion, to show up, and to go, oh, it's the Judgment card, or oh, whatever those cards are to you that are really negative, that you feel has an inherent negative aspect. Instead of having that initial reaction, it should be like, okay, how is this useful or is this not useful to the situation? And sort of reading it through that lens is so important, to get a really nuanced reading that's actually helpful to have. Okay. Okay, let's see. Chris says, my first response to Tower will always be, I don't ever say never, or never say never or always, right? You may work yourself, you have to talk yourself out of it, and eventually you may find, because I was the same way with the Devil, with any of the Christian kind of iconography of the major arcana, and now a Judgment. I always had a real struggle with the Judgment. You know, it is relating to the judgment seat of Christ, and that was used as a, you know, a whipping post in the way that I was raised. And so I would always have that negative connotation, no matter what. I start from that negative place and then have to talk myself out. And now I'm thrilled when I see the Judgment card. So you may work your way out of it. You may down the road say, oh, you know what? I'm actually pretty happy when I see the Tower now. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about, we've already touched on this a little bit in the first part of the class, but some people are just starting in the second part, so we're going to go over this. So there are two concepts in a traditional sense, to elemental, the elements. So three, actually, let's step back. There are three ways to see elements in tarot, right? We obviously see the four suits. Now, again, the four suits have not always been connected to the elements, right? That's something that was layered on. That's one of the layers that I do take on. That's a primary correspondence. That is a primary part of the way that I read. It is the numbers and it is the elements and how those things come together in the minors. And then in the majors, it is much more to do for me about that trajectory or that story. However, elements in tarot in a modern context are seen, yes, in the suits itself, so that the wands are the suit of fire for the most part. Again, you can see flops for that. Water is most often associated with cups. Air is associated most often with swords, and pentacles or coins are associated with earth, right? That's the most of all of the decks that I have, in which I have a lot, the most often you're going to see those elemental correspondences to the suits. Now, there are traditions that flop the wands, and so that wands are associated with air and swords are associated with fire. That is a tradition. And you will see a couple decks. The main deck that I can think of would be the in a modern deck would be the Modern Spellcasters, has that flop, right? So, but almost all of the tarot decks that you would purchase today have wands as fire, swords as air, cups as water, and pentacles or coins as earth. That's pretty traditional for most of the decks that you're going to purchase today, right? So we know that the suits are elementally connected now pretty solidly with tarot. And again, can you get away from that? Yes, but you would need to then go to a pip deck to separate away from those elemental associations for the most part in modern decks. The other way in which elements have been associated in tarot is elemental rulership of the court cards. So all pages are considered to be traditionally earth, right? So all pages are earth. So in the page of wands, we see the earth of fire, or fire of earth, however you want to say that, right? We see the combination of earth and of fire, but how is it expressing itself in an earthy manner? The page of swords is air, but being expressed in the fire, or in earth. Cups, it's associating water, yes, as the overarching, but it's expressing itself in its earth position, right? Because elements don't just sit neatly away from each other. They combine and they interact with each other. And so we can see in the quartz those interactions. And so you have the pages as generally seen as associated with earth, knights associated with air, queens associated with water, kings associated with fire. Now, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. There are people who swap the fire for the knights and the kings as air, and you can make a solid case for that, right? If you think about knights as being really active and forward pushing and moving forward and more volatile in many ways, and they are producing change, they are going out, and fighting, and they're moving and going on adventures, you could make a case for that being associated with fire. Whereas the kings are now older and they are wiser and they are ruling from a place of intellect, right? So you can certainly make a solid case for that, and there is a tradition for that. I would say as a general rule, this is the way that you'll see them associated, but then sometimes those two are swapped. And so you have to figure out, again, what works for you and apply it consistently. And again, I think that they both work. I do see knights as being that seeking mind. They're still going out and they're learning. They are still going out and figuring things out. They're running hither and yon, still like gathering information and gathering knowledge. And then you have the kings coming in who have the true power of transformation. So if you think about fire as being the fullness of passion, the fullness of shifting, changing, transforming energy, the kings, when we're looking at a hierarchy of rulership, the kings have that ability to completely shape the world around them in a powerful way. So you can really, I think, make a very good case for the knights being air and the kings being fire. A lot of times people will, again, depending on your tradition, it's easy to see the kings as fire as well, because the emperor is often associated with Aries and associated with a fiery energy. And so the kings are mini emperors, right? And so then you can see that connection there. So you can make a case for either one, but I would say that most often this is how you will see them. It's potentially, this may be the Golden Dawn's correspondence, is having the knights at air and the kings as fire. So the same thing happens as, oh, okay. Well, I'll pull that up in a second. I just went to move the chat and lost it. So that's good. I need to stay on topic anyways. So then you also have, so elemental rulership are the understanding that earth rules all of the pages. Air or fire, however you decide, but we're going to stick with this for right now just so it won't get confusing. Air is ruling the knights, water is ruling the queens, and fire is ruling the kings. Elemental dignities are seeing the way that the earth is about the pentacles, the air is connected to the swords, the water connected to cups, the fire connected to wands, but then also we have elemental dignities of the majors, right? Now there are again some arguments here, and I have stars here. So for the most part, these are the major arcana that are associated with earth. The magician, there is an argument for earth because the earth contains all of the elements. It's interesting because if you read Aleister Crowley's description of the court cards, I love his description of the pages or the princesses in his deck. And the princesses are actually the most powerful in many ways because they express all of the elements because earth has all of the elements combined together. And so of course we see with the magician that usage of all of the elements, and so that he's argued for the earth. Some people put the magician in air because he is all mental. I see the magician as all mental because he's working with everything and pulling that into being. So I would, oh, I might be frozen. Let's see. Let me pull chat back up. Okay, thank you. I got a warning up here and I thought, okay, I better get this up. So, again, you can make an argument for all of these things, but traditionally, magician is argued for earth because it uses all of the elements and it's pulling from the ethereal and into the physical realm, manifesting all of the elements. I don't see the magician as Chris does, right? But he's a Gemini, as he said. And also it can have to do with what are the types of, your worldview. Are you more of a, say, a ritual magician? Then you might see things in a different way, right? So I'm really comfortable with the magician and earth, but I can understand why people put the magician as air. Judgment is another one that's sometimes argued. The judgment is sometimes argued for fire, and that is associated with the judgment seat of Christ, right? So we know that the judgment card came from the concept of the judgment seat of Christ. We're coming before the divinity, right? Out something greater than ourselves after we die, and we're putting all of our works in front of whatever our version of the divine is, and it goes through the fire, and what it was inconsequential is burned away. Our jewels and our crowns and the things that we got right, and our things that we brought to the table are left in the form of gold, right? They have been fired by, they have been amplified and purified through fire. And so when we look at the judgment seat and the judgment in the modern context, we're doing the same thing. We're just doing it for ourselves, right? We're stepping into the situation and analyzing and saying, okay, how did I get to where I am? Yep, I made some bad decisions here. I made some really good decisions here. Some of these things were outside of my control, and I just need to let go of those because I had no control over that. We're really giving a good assessment of ourselves, and then we're moving forward. But some people use the judgment as fire because of that idea of the judgment seat of Christ, whereas other people use the judgment as water because it's the idea of rebirth. That once we have that assessment, the purpose of the judgment card is to say that we're now stepping into a rebirth situation. So, it can go either direction depending on what makes sense to you. And temperance is the other one that gets associated with it gets associated with fire, but I do think it's one of those liminal energies where it can be both fire and water because it's a perfect balance of both of those. You often see the mixing of the cups of fire and water, and it's not that one is stronger than the other, it's that combining those things together is where perfect balance comes. So I would definitely agree with temperance as being a liminal space in which it is a combination of water and fire in perfect balance. But, again, these are just the traditional, this is a traditional way of looking at the cards. And so I'm kind of giving you the most traditional in the way that I saw it, right? So elemental rulership is understanding that each of the courts has an element of themselves. So when we're looking at the queens, we are looking around, we're looking at the understanding of flow and movement and intuitive energy and internal power. All of them are expressing that water energy, that internal psychic intuitive power of water. And they're expressing it in different ways based off of their elements, right? All of the kings we're going to stick with it as it is just for example, but if we think about the fire, they have the ability to transform the world around them. They have the ability to do that, and they are expressing that in their own suits, in their own elements, right? And so that's elemental rulership, whereas elemental dignities are showing us what is the dignity of each of the suits, and then how are the how are the majors can be pulled into that as well. Now, this ties a lot with astrology, right? So a lot of the ways in which people decide, or people in the past decide what element a particular major is because of the astrological correspondence, right? So if the emperor is associated astrologically with Aries, then you're going to put the emperor in the position of fire, right? So some of the reasons why you might, because you can make a case for a lot of different ways of being able to do it. And so that if you are into astrology, that's going to make a lot of sense, because you're not going to really wobble around about them, because it has to do with their astrological rulership. What is the astrological correspondence to that major? And that's going to tell you what element it is. And there's really no kind of arguing. There's no argument there, because it's based off of the astrological correspondence, right? If you don't use astrology, then it starts to get like, okay, well, does this feel more like this, or does it feel more like that? And then it can really go in either direction. And so what do you do about that? Number one, you may never look at elemental rulership or dignity after this class. You might be like, that's really cool and interesting, but yeah, no, it doesn't do anything to me. It doesn't do anything for me. That was cool to learn it, but I'm never going to use it. And it's a moot point. If it does interest you, then you might, make a column for earth, and a column for air, column for water, column for fire. Go through your majors and say, okay, where does this fit? Where does this particular major fit for me? And so, and be able to do that. I will say on a personal level that, I don't use it a lot with the majors, but that's the case for, again, astrology as well. I don't do astrological correspondences to the majors. It doesn't inform the way that I read the majors. And I use elemental energy far less. It doesn't mean that I'll never kind of lean into it, but for the most part, it's not a primary way that I read. I understand it, and it's interesting to me, but this way that we're going to use to look at how the elements interact, I use far more often with the pip cards than I do with the majors. And that's just my personal way of associating it. I don't strongly associate the majors with elements. Again, I understand it. I think it's interesting. It can pop out for me in some, capacity, but it's not a primary focus for me. So you take, again, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. But I at least want to have that there, and you have it. We're going to look at your sheets and when we go hands down, but you do have this graph so that you can refer back to that if this is something that is interesting. But what's important here, so that's just the purpose of that is to understand, okay, this is how traditionally, when people started associating astrology and Kabbalah, and I don't know, Kabbalah is completely outside of my knowledge realm, other than obviously I've read about it in books, and I understand a lot of the basic structures of Kabbalah, but is Kabbalah at heart an elemental system? I have no clue. Like, that's not something that I lean into. Yes, we're going to do, Raf sent me a direct message here. We're going to demonstrate this, and we're going to walk through this some more. So bear with me. We're kind of laying the foundations, right? We're laying the foundations here. So we understand, without diving too deep, that there are elements in tarot through the suits, right? That's a really obvious elemental correspondence there. We can understand, come to an understanding that the courts themselves have elemental rulerships. And that's something that I'm aware of more so than the majors, right? I understand that, and it makes sense to me, the queens all being expressions of that intuitive inner power, the kings being all, expressions of that outer power of fire. The knights being in that more intellectual space makes sense for me, and the pages being sort of absorbing all of the elements as they are learning makes a lot of sense to me, and that does inform the way I understand pages, and where I understand knights and queens and kings. Elemental dignities, when we get to the elemental correspondences to the majors, has less of an impact on me, and I use it never. And unless I'm giving examples of it, I don't really use it. I do use it in, say, cards like the Temperance card. I do understand that the Justice is about that, more of that air energy and that sense of clarity. So it does inform it, but I don't like sit there and think, oh, here's the Devil card, this is an Earth card, and I don't process through that as I go. So again, but it's interesting to see and understand the whole structure of tarot in this way, to see the way that things are correlating in this beautiful synergy of elements through the whole system is really beautiful to see. And I think it's important to at least look at it and see the way in which the cards can interact in this way, whether or not you ever use it again in an actual reading or not. It's just like when we're laying the cards out in sets of 10, or we're laying them out in three sets of 7. It's a way to wrap our head around a way of seeing the cards as a whole that's more in some ways academic than it is practical or usage based. But we do use some of this, and we're going to get there in a second. So that's one thing. We're looking at the understanding of the whole of tarot in an elemental context. Now, the classical rules to this are taken from McGregor Mather's Book of Tea. This is something that comes out of the Golden Dawn, and I should have put I'll make a note to get the date for this because I'm terrible with numbers. And so I am not a person that can pull dates out of my head because I don't retain numbers. But I will get that because I should have had that on there. And maybe, nope, it's not in the handout either. So I'll make sure to get that information. So this was the basic structure here. These are the sort of the rules of operation for looking at the way in which cards interact elementally. So cards are considered to be strong when the suits and the elements are the same. And we see this in geomancy as well. If you do geomancy, you will see this understanding when when we have figures that are of the same base element, they're going to be strong. They're going to work together more strongly. Or if they have the same elemental rulers or astrological rulership, they are going to be stronger when they're together. So this concept we don't see just in tarot, but we can see it in tarot as well. If we have two fire cards next to each other, they are strong together, either good or evil. It's not decided. This is the exact way that he says it. They're very strong for either good or evil according to their nature. So whatever nature that card is, it is going to be strong together because they are both the same element. Water and water is going to be strong because we've doubled up our water. Air and air is going to be strong. We've doubled up our air. It makes sense, right? If you have the same element, you're getting more of that element. And so when we look at a reading and we scan and we see there's a lot of fire, we note that and we say, oh, wow, there's a lot of fire here. That's really expanding and really making that element much more predominant in the reading just by the nature of there being more of that element. Thank you so much. It is 1888, and Mendy said there is actually the book in PDF format that Benabel has linked on her site. That's fabulous. I will make sure. I have the other two chats. I'm going to put them all into the week's chats into the Dropbox file. That way you can come back and find this link or just click it and like bookmark it. So it makes sense, right? If it's the same element, they're going to be strong. Now we're going to look at this in a second, but traditionally elemental energy is masculine or active, feminine or passive. I would say in a modern context, we've kind of shifted over to that understanding of active and passive or active and receptive. we understand, we work with that as well. Now, some people are kind of trying to walk a step away from dualities at all. Duality is something that is part of my particular practice. I do work with active and receptive, or active and passive energy. It is really primary important to understand in terms of geomancy, and Western elements have, as a very strong tradition, this understanding of active energy versus receptive or passive energy. And so if they are both, so we have traditionally air and fire are masculine or active, and traditionally earth and water are receptive or feminine, right? And so if they are of the same active or receptive energy, they are going to be moderately strong. So fire and air together are moderately strong. Air and water, or I'm sorry, water and earth are going to be moderately strong to each other because they are of the same elemental type. I think Miss Jamie must be leaving because I see a bunch of bye. I'm trying to ignore the chat for right now just so I can, step our way through this clearly, right? So cards are strong when they are the same element. Makes sense. When they are of the same elemental type, either masculine or feminine, active or receptive, however you approach that, right? They are going to be moderately strong. They're going to support each other. Then there are, and we're going to see a graph of this, I think is hopefully going to make more sense. When the suits and the elements complement each other, they're somewhat friendly. So now we're getting to like positive neutral, right? In a way. And this is fire and earth and air and water. Again, we're going to show you why that's the case. And then when the cards are contrary elements, they will weaken each other for good or for evil, depending on what the card is. And so that is fire and water and air and earth. So let's take a look at this next screen here. Wow. Let me go here and then we'll come back to that other one. So if we look at the way in which, so this graph, and you have a copy of this in your handout, we're going to show that in a minute. This is the way that classical Western elements, right, have been seen to work together. There is an understanding of hot and dry, wet and cold. We're not going to go far into this. If you have any kind of tradition in Western magic, this probably, you recognize this as seeing this, but for the sake of what we're talking about today, we have fire here and we have air. They are both active, and they are both active energies, and so they strengthen each other. Air and water are kind of neutral to each other, and so they don't really support each other overly strongly, and they really don't have much impact on each other. Water and earth strengthen each other because they are both receptive energies. They're the same elemental type, and so they strengthen each other. Whereas fire and earth are relatively neutral. They don't have a lot of impact on each other. Fire and water weaken each other. See, they're across away from each other, and they weaken each other. Think about if you light a fire underwater, the water is going to evaporate. It's going to change the concept. It's going to change and evaporate the water. Whereas if you throw water on fire, you're going to put the fire out, and it's going to take that fire away, right? We have air and earth as opposite of each other, and they are going to weaken each other. Earth, you can think about earth, trapping in pockets of air. There is the opposite ends of heaviness with air and earth in terms of weight, which comes into Western elements. But you have that they're just completely separate from each other, and they will weaken each other. Think about like a tornado tearing up the mountainside or a tract of earth in some way. And so this is the chart that you can use to sort of see why. And again, some of this again comes into traditional Western elements and the way that they work with each other. So in this way of reading though, and we can see this in the modern application, fire and fire support each other. Air and air support each other. Water and water support each other. Earth and earth support each other, all strongly. They're the same elements. Fire and air are friendly and active, so they're moderately strong. Water and earth are friendly and passive or receptive, and they are moderately strong. Fire and water are enemies. They will weaken each other. Air and earth are enemies. They will weaken each other. And then fire and earth, neutral. They don't really have an impact on each other, and water and air, neutral, and or it can neutralize it. And Mathers, not Matthews, has some specific ways. Let me go back here. Oh, my chat's messing things up. In practice, Mathers did some things in where if things could cancel themselves out, so he wouldn't read specific cards on the table. We're not going to go too far into this. I don't read them that way. Any card, and I'm this way with runes, I'm this way with anything. If a card is on the table, I'm going to read the card, right? So that's just kind of outside my way of reading. But if you have two cards that are enemies, they would cancel themselves out. They can't hang out in the same room. They can't be, they can't occupy the same space. And so you wouldn't even read those cards. That's just not the way that I read, right? And same thing with triads, because you mostly do this in sets of 3. And so if you have triads and the two flanking cards cancel each other out, all you're doing is then looking at the one card. So again, he did have ways, and Mary Greer has an article on this that you can go take a look at and be able to read it. He would actually just not read certain cards based on what was going on with the cards and whether they canceled each other out. It's not a way that I read, but I do want to at least point it out that in the original method of looking at the ways in which elements reacted and acted towards each other can be taken to an extreme and cancel cards out. Again, everything that's on the table for me, whether it's a rune reading or a tarot reading, is going to get read by me. That's just my way of looking at things. But I do like to point those things out just for the sake of teaching, right? So let's look at this in practice, and we're going to go heads down. We're going to go hands down on the table and do this, and hopefully start to see where this can be useful. However you choose to apply this can be useful in the long run, right? And so let's take a look at this example that we have right here. And this is most often practiced in sets of 3. I do a lot of 3-card readings, and so this makes a lot of sense to me. And so I am aware of this because I use a lot of sets of 3-card readings. I don't use this as much if you're using a full spread, because again, when a spread comes in, a spread is starting to really set a lot of parameters, but I will still look at certain things that are interacting with each other. So it is useful outside of a 3-card reading, but it shines the most in 3-card readings, right? So when I do a 3-card reading, and that's going to be part of your homework assignment for this week, is to do 3-card readings without position. So we've done some with like within, without advice, past, present, and future. But in this week, you're going to want to do 3-card readings that don't have a position. And so when I do 3-card readings without a position, that central card becomes that primary focus. And the other 2 cards are giving us more information about that central card. And so this plays very well with that style of reading, because we're really looking at the central card and the way in which the 2 cards on either side of that are interacting with that main card, right? So for example, of this one, we have the main card as being water, right? It's a cup card. When we look at the cards on either side of it, we have the moon card, which is considered a water card. You've got your chart that you can look at and see that, but it's considered a water card. And so that moon energy is supporting the energy of that cup. So you can start to see where we can get an idea of reversals or whether something is helping that situation or not without using a reverse card, right? So we're not using a reverse card, but we're saying, okay, here's this Two of Cups in the middle, and this Moon card is actually being supportive to this card because they're both water. Now, if this would have been a fire card, we could have looked at the Moon card because it's water as not being supportive, and we would have looked at this in more of a shadow aspect of the Moon because it isn't supporting the energy of the card, right? So this is a way to understand the way that cards are interacting with each other and get an idea of whether something is fortunate or not fortunate without using reversals. Excuse me. So in this situation, though, I would be reading the Two of Cups as the main card. I would be reading the the Moon card here is supporting the energy, and the Earth and the water are also friendly. And so that, so the Moon card is strengthening the energy of, and actually lifting it up because they're both water. Whereas the Earth card is there in the King of Coins as there, and it is supporting. It may not be pushing it up further, but it's certainly supporting the Two of Cups. And so I would be reading this and we're going to do some actual readings here and apply this, but I would be reading all of these cards in their fortunate positions as being supportive to the energy of the situation, right? And so that can be very helpful to look at. So then let's look at the, yes, thank you, Leah. Leah. Leah, sorry, you're like, maybe not Star Wars. Yes, so when you're looking at just the strict elemental here, now we can start to nuance that by saying all the kings are fire, but in terms of the cards on the table, the base understanding is here we have the King of Earth, right? So we have the King of Pentacles, which is a Earth card. Now he has that layer of fire there, and that can add a nuance to it. But right now we're just going at the face value of the Court card. Good question. But the first base, the King of Earth, is at first level the King of Earth. And so we're in a reading, we would be looking at that as Earth on the table, but then there's that expression of fire that there is there as well. So I would say at least in this first week of looking at these, just look at the courts in their actual element of their suit, if that makes sense. Let me take a drink real quick. Okay, so let's look at some other examples here. I'm gonna kind of move chat around here. So here's another example. Here we have the Devil in the main middle position, the strength position, right? The focus of the reading. And here we have the Devil, which is traditionally seen as fire, and it's not hard to see why, right? Why the Devil might be associated with fire, although I'm sure it has to do with astrology as well. But this is traditionally seen as a fire energy. And then we have a Cups over here. So now we have water and fire. So we have the Five of Cups, and in this reading, this Five of Cups wouldn't necessarily be supporting the energy of the Devil, which isn't negative, right? So if we think that out, because this is causing us to have to, go through logically. If the Devil is showing up in a reading that says you've abdicated your power, the Five of Cups is coming in and putting out that fire, and in some way going to aid you, right, in abdicating or pulling your power back. So it doesn't help the Devil, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't support you. So it's really a lot of, it's fun for my Libra brain. Some people despise this, right? They despise this whole ideology here and the way that this works. But if you think about it as puzzle pieces and you're trying to think about the way in which these cards are interacting with each other in some way, we're starting to really get into where we're trying to suss out how is this reading going to help me to navigate the energy of a situation. That Five of Cups coming in is going to actually weaken, right, the fire, right, because it weakens it. So we want the devil in its normal sense. We want the devil energy. We want that to be weakened so that we can get our power back. So just because those two cards are at odds with each other doesn't mean that they're negative, because that determination depends on the question itself, right? As Chris said, context is key. So we're still not saying whether this is fortunate or unfortunate, because that as a reading, because that has to do with our question. But we know that the devil is here in the middle. It is traditionally a fire card. The water card to the left here is going to weaken the energy of the devil, which is going to actually be something that's going to be useful, right? Now, what's interesting is that we have the Justice card on the other side, which is traditionally seen as an air sign. And this actually enhances the energy of fire or the devil. Now, I see this as also as positive, because if you think about bringing in logic to the situation, this is actually going to help me disentangle the energy of the devil as well. But that's getting into reading it, right? So at its base, the water is going to weaken and the air is going to come in and support. It's not uplifting it, because it's not the same energy. It's just supporting it. It's there. It's not dragging it down. It's supporting it. We're going to do this in reading context. So bear with me. Here. So again, when we're looking at these three cards, the center card is fire. We have wands on one side. We have swords on the other side. The fire is uplifting that energy. It's strengthening the energy of the fire, and air is supporting the energy of that card here. So we're seeing these two energies here. And I just wanted to go through, I think that's So I wanted to go through a couple of those. What I love here is what Benabel Wen said. And we're going to go on table. I wanted to get the concept out, and then we're going to see how can we use this in a reading. But this is my order of operations that always has to remind you of things. That one, where we talked about fortunate or unfortunate comes through the context of the question, right? When we start to read and process a reading, we're never doing something that takes away from what we've said before. As readers, we should be building a narrative. We are building a message. So we don't ever go so far in a reading and the next thing we do pulls that, takes that down, says, oh, nope, I was completely wrong. It shouldn't do that. It's always going to be, each layer of the reading should enhance the step before. And you'll see that, especially next week when we start to really process through a large reading. I think that's really key to any kind of reading, is that as we process through a reading, we're getting a message, getting a message, getting a message, getting a message. That last message that we get is not going to completely upend. We're reading it in context of the step before it. So that's important for me. The other thing is, I love what Benabel Wen said about elemental dignities. And she said, interpreting a tarot reading by card meanings helps the seeker to understand what's going on. When you interpret elemental dignities, it enhances that understanding by explaining why. So we're starting to see why something is happening versus just what's happening. And it can be really useful in that way to see how are the energies interacting, how is that contributing to a particular situation. And so this is why some people like to use elemental dignities. And really what she says has to do with all of these things that we're doing to create context between the cards, right? When we're looking at ghost cards, we're trying to see, yes, this is happening now, but we are answering why is that happening by seeing the ghost card of the past there. And so it starts to bring more context to the card by seeing the ghost cards. When we look at the Major Arcana card in the trajectory of where it comes at in the Major Arcana storyline, then we are starting to see context to that card versus that card sitting static on the table. When we look at elemental dignities, we're starting to remind ourselves, whether we apply this rigidly or loosely, we're reminding ourselves the way in which those energies are interacting with each other versus just sitting there flat on the table, right? And so how you use this and to what degree that you use this is going to just aid to bring connection between your cards versus laying there on the table. And it just allows you to see the interaction. Elemental dignities allows you to see the interaction of the elements in a way that I think is difficult outside of casting methods. So I do think it's good in that way. I see some questions. I'm going to get to those. I'm going to go ahead and stop this share here. And let me go back up here. Rafe asks me, is there an intrinsic meaning to the elements? For example, there are intrinsic meanings to the suits, i.e. passion, emotions, reason, those types of things. But are there meanings for the elements, or are they simply functional in terms of card interactions? That's a good question. I think that there are two layers. Well, again, from my perspective, there's two layers. Elements for me do, and certainly in Western elements, and Eastern elements are very different. You know, I have a friend who is a I Ching master, and she works with Eastern elements. It is not always the same as Western elements. So in tarot, we're looking at a Western system that came out of Italy and France, and it came out of Europe, and it is definitely intrinsically tied the further that history goes with Western magic, right? And so a lot of the constructs, including elements, are based off of Western elements. And so, yes, there is intrinsic meaning. So for me, the element of water has to do with the belly. So again, mixing some things, but in elemental Western elements, the order of operations of elements goes from heaviest at the bottom to lightest at the top. So the element of spirit, which some people see as the fifth element, I see it more as source of all of the elements. But again, you know, this, that, or the other, however you see it, is at the top. It's the most ethereal. And then you have fire, and then you have air, and then you have water, and then you have earth as that more solid on the ground. Geomantically, which is based off of Western geomancy, which is based off of Western elements, sees the fire at the head, your air at the throat, you know, where you're speaking, water's at the belly, and earth is at the feet. That makes sense in terms of how we, in terms of tarot, how we look at the elements. And so for me, fire is about passion. It is about, the element itself is very passionate. It burns hot. It is very active, because I do use the active connotations of fire. Can it be receptive and passive? Yes. It can be burnt down into coal, but that starts, you know, again, you could do a whole class just on the elements if you really want to start to get into it. But at its base level, Western elements, fire is active, and it is about our passions, and it is very transformative energy. So elements for me are twofold. One, they have that intrinsic meaning, but two, they are about how energy is also moving. So how is it moving? What is it doing? Also comes into play. But I think that most people that work with energy, as a primary part of there, does see the energy itself, so water itself, as having intrinsic meaning outside of tarot itself. I don't know if that answers your question, Rafe, or not. Chris says it's cool to see what energy. Yeah, okay, I think I saw that. I like that the what versus the why. Sorry, I was like, what? That sentence did not make sense. Chris says he likes the what versus the why. I always want to know the why. Geomancy is very good at that too, very much so. So is castings, because we can see that, again, the clumping together. And what I feel about elemental dignities, however, to whatever degree you use them, allows for that interaction to be seen on the table in a way that I don't think it does as much without that. if we read in layers, as you said, Kelly, is there a specific order to the layer? And we're going to talk a lot more about this next week, Sue, like kind of refreshing sort of how we would process through a reading. And I would say that that depends on each person, right? And it depends on what are important layers to you. So for me, when I look at a reading, I'm going to look at the number and the elements first. That's my base layer. Especially when we talk about minors. Majors are pretty easy. They have sort of their intrinsic meaning of what they are, and they kind of stand there as that. But in terms of the minors, which for me is the most interesting, I know that most people love the majors, and the whole, those Western magicians didn't like the minors all that well, a little bit snobs to the minors. I go out minors first. They're more interesting to me than the majors are. The majors make sense. They're useful. They are fabulous, but they're less interesting to me as the minors. And so for me, my minors start with number versus the element. So I'm always going to start there and then start to build from there. Somebody else, might have a different layer. So that you might be a Rider-Waite-Smith person. And so the Rider-Waite-Smith meaning of that's a system, right? Rider-Waite-Smith is a system of tarot. And so the Rider-Waite-Smith meaning might be first for you. You might say, okay, this is what this card means. Now I'm going to look at the number and I'm going to look at the element. Whereas I would say, I'm going to look at the number and the element. I'm going to pull in what I know about Rider-Waite-Smith meanings. I'm going to pull all the different things on top of that, but I'm going to start here. So the layering is going to come into effect depending on what is your particular process. But we are going to kind of talk a little bit more about processing or reading next week and lean into that a little bit more. Ellen asked, do you see the elements as symbolic or meaningful in themselves? Both. Both. I do believe in, I do see the elements as being actual energy, right? So that is actual energy that is all around us. So we can't see it, or some people can more than others, but it is active in the world as energy, right? And so I see it as something that is intrinsic of itself. It is energy. It is what's all around us and connects things and holds things together and loosens binds, all of that. So separate. And then I also see it as symbolic, right? We're looking at elements in tarot or whatever we're using that's elementally based or geomancy, and we're seeing those things in a symbolic sense as well. So they can exist as both. You best see this in geomancy, where and you see this also in I Ching as well, although obviously with Eastern elements, the understanding that a geomancy symbol is symbolic and having a symbolic message, but is also representative of that actual energy out in the world, so that if I go in and change the figure or change opening of the lines in I Ching, I am actually making an effect in the energetic world, right? So that kind of steps us into magic and all that kind of stuff, how we see energy working. But my answer to that question is both, that there is actual energy out and about and interacting in the world, and then we also use it in a symbolic way very often in readings. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let me see. I think I don't think I've missed a direct question, but if I have, make sure you put it, re-put it up there for me. I would appreciate that. Okay, let me swap down here. All right. Let me minus that out of the way. Hi, Isabel. Okay, let me close a couple things. I don't need that up there anymore, just so we have the least things open. There we go. Okay. All right, so there we go. So let me see. This one has reversals, so I'm going to just kind of set that over here. and pull out the next deck. Well, let's pull out, although I think this has, yeah, this does actually have obvious elements in it. Okay. So you have in your handouts, and this would be this, we're on track. I flopped 1 and 2, but if you don't have like the full thing, or you have the full beginning, but then you're using the intermediate handouts, this would be in the Dropbox under week 3. And so what you do have here is the this sheet, kind of cheat sheet to use. And again, if this ends up being something that really interests you and you really want to play with this, you can, go through here and figure out for your own self, okay, where are you placing the major arcana? These are just the traditional ways they're being seen, some of the exceptions and some of the ways in people, argue between that, so you can pick which is which for you. But you can kind of come to sort of an idea for yourself. Again, I always think that that's helpful, right? Figure out, okay, most people see it this way. I'm looking at it and my understanding of things, and this is the way I'm going to organize it. Write that down in your journal or whatever, and so that you can be consistent, because the key to anything is consistency, right? Figure out what works. Now there's going to be some liminal space there while you're figuring out that what works, but at some point you kind of have to pick a side, so to speak, and do your readings from a consistent space. So that's how we get consistent readings. If we're constantly flip-flopping the way that we apply these, you're not going to get a consistency, and it's going to be a lot less useful to you. So taking the time to sit down and look at these and say, okay, well, I do see the Empress as Earth. That makes sense. The Hierophant, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like I might see the Hierophant maybe over into the air position, because the Hierophant is sort of intellectualizing belief. Like we have this idea of belief, but then when you think about the Hierophant is coming in and sort of structuring that and making it more mental than actually that feeling based. I'm literally just pulling things. Like you can make whatever justification you want. You see the Hierophant as air. So you take some time to think about that and say, okay, well, these make sense. Like here we actually have the Devil as earth, but I know I've seen the Devil as fire as well. So, again, are you going off of the Devil as that Christian construct of the devil? It makes sense to put the devil in fire, but maybe you're looking at the devil as more of the shadow dancer in the Tarot of the Hidden Realms, or in the Druid craft, when you're looking at the Horned God. And then I could see, I would probably put the devil in that context into the position of Earth as well. So it really depends on your context. And so taking the time to think about these things, again, if this interests you, if this is just an intellectual exercise and you're never going to look at it again, don't worry about it. But if this does interest you, take the time to think about it. Again, in my personal practice, I use the minors more in this way, and I don't do a whole lot with the majors in terms of their elemental context. So you can also hybrid it like that, where it's like, okay, I'm aware of the way these energies are working together, but I'm paying a lot less attention to the majors in this context. So take the time to think about it, is guess my thing. So you've got that there. And then I think this chart is the most helpful in terms of if you're going to sit down and do some readings, right? And see how this might work. Having this in front of you is going to help you to be able to process through reading. So, oops. Okay, cards, stay over there. So let's do a couple examples here. And let's see, does anybody have a question that they want to throw out there? Again, remember, obviously everybody's seeing this, so you won't want to be too personal. And we're not going to probably dive into your entire life story, so maybe keep that in mind. But if you have a question that you want to throw out there, just because I prefer to use real questions than fake questions, but I'll find a real question if nobody has one. Let me give this a good shuffle. Oh, and this deck, sorry. This deck is the Mythical Creatures Tarot by, again, we're doing a Baba Studios day. So this is the Mythical Creatures. I didn't buy this when it first came out because A, Baba Studio decks are expensive, so I really want the deck if I'm going to buy it. And B, when it first came out in a non-colored version, and it was, to me, very, very busy. And it's for my own brain. It was just like the line work was just really busy. And then when I saw the colored version, I was like, oh my goodness. And then I hadn't even realized the first version because I didn't really pay attention to it. I didn't realize it was a stunningly beautiful pip deck. And then I had to go with it. Sue says, okay, great. We got some questions. I'll ask one that I keep asking. What's the energy around a house sale? Okay, so Miss Sue has a house sale going on. And so we're just going to see what's the energy surrounding that sale. So remember, in this process this week, you also have this right here, right? You're going to be laying your card. You can lay your cards however you want, but your primary card is going to be the central card. And then you're going to be looking at the other two cards here as supporting this. Now, there is two fun ways that you can do this, and we'll practice those, right? So one of them is using the center card as a significator and pulling the cards on either side of it. This is something pulled from Lenormand, but I love to use it in tarot. It's a great way to work with tarot when you're not working with positions, and then other ways to lay them down randomly. So we're going to play with that, but it's key that you don't have any positions here. We're really looking at the center card as the main focus of the reading, and then these cards are giving us more information surrounding the situation. So first we'll do it random. And we're going to do it for Miss Sue, who has a house sale situation and wanting to sort of get a feel for the energy surrounding the house. Now this is going to be hard I'm going to do it my way, but you don't have to do this. I try to make sure when I do 3-card readings, I split, like I slide split. The first card that I lay down is at the split, right? The second card that I lay down is at the other side of the split. It's hard to explain. The second card, and this is the central card, right, to the deck. And then the last card is the bottom of the deck. That's just how I lay 3 cards down, regardless of what it is. You just can split. And again, like we talked about in the first class, however you do it. Some people split their cards and I don't even know how they do it. They, kind of pull things up like this, and then they pull from the top. Some people, will just shuffle, 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 deal off the top. Some people will shuffle, 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 and just break it in half this way and take this card and work off at the top here. Like however you shuffle and split, there's no right, there's no wrong way. But that's how I do 3 cards. So the main card is the center here. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Okay. So our main card is the center, and we have the Queen of Swords. Now, in this case, this deck was not in order, but we have all air cards here for that. And the first one is the Queen of Swords. Now, the Queens, so I'm going to process this reading, and then we're going to take a look at it this way. So the first thing that I'm going to look at when I'm doing a reading is look at the central card. It's the main card of the reading. So the Queen of Swords is a very positive card for me because it's my significator card. But the Queens for me are always about, in some way, it's asking you to set your world in a way in which the energy of their suit can prevail. So the suit of swords is about air. The suit of swords is connected, for me, to air. It's connected to the mind. It's connected to the intellect here. And so this would tell me that for Miss Sue, let me make sure I'm on the right person here. Let me scroll back up. I think people have talking about the Tildwick, which I think just came back out. I have meant to message a couple people and see if I needed that or not. But let me go back up to, I missed it. I believe it's Sue. Yes, Sue's asking about the house, right? And so really this, well, because I'm seeing all swords here, the first thing that I would say to Sue as a reading is that she really does want to bring a lot of clarity and bring her mental space into bear. This is a time to be paying attention to details. This is a time to be analyzing things from the space of the mind. And the Queen is about making sure that you set things up so that your mind can be in charge here. You might really want to move. You might really want to, and your passions might be high. Your water level, your inner realm might be in turmoil about this, but you've got to find a way to clear all that away and let the mind be, the mental space and clarity come into full form. So that's how I would see the Queen here. So now elementally, we are looking to see that on both sides of this are swords, right? So all three of these are swords, all three of these are air. So now we have air, like with exclamation points, right? Because both of these cards on either side are not just supporting it, but they're magnifying it. They're lifting up the energy of that because it's the same energy, all air. So if you look on your little chart here, right? Air and air support each other strongly. So it's really kind of uplifting and amplifying the energy of the cards. So here we have the Nine of Swords, which is amplifying this. Now, this is where we get into understanding that just because it's amplifying it doesn't mean it's positive or doesn't mean it's necessarily a good thing, right? So the Nine of Swords is about a lot of dynamic energy. The number 9 is 3 + 3 + 3, 3 times 3. It's dynamic energy that's bouncing around. That can be good and that can be bad, right? It can be great to have all that extra, energy in your mind to be able to utilize, to be able to make a decision, to be able to make sure you're doing everything correctly. But very often nines can be overwhelming. And the Nine of Swords in particular for me is about exaggerated energy. The good energy that we need to process is there. We go, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to write the next book over here. And I'm going to go over here. I'm going to do this. And we got all this mental energy at our disposal. But it can also exaggerate negatives. It can exaggerate our fears. It can exaggerate real problems. So maybe money is a problem in the sale of this house, but your Nine of Swords energy is amplifying that into that's all you're focusing on. So whenever the Nine of Swords comes up, it's amplifying this. But is it doing that in a positive way or a negative way, right? You might need, with the Nine of Swords, you always have to bring things down a notch so you're dealing with the actual problem, not dealing with something exaggerated. That's how I would read that, right? So this is amplifying the need for clarity because there's probably a lot. Your brain is probably going around and around and around. You're processing it over and over and over and over and over again to the point in which it may not be so useful. So just because this is supporting it doesn't mean it's good for the situation, right? But then on the other side, we have the Ace of Swords. Aces are about clarity, cleanness. They are the suit of swords, the suit of air at its best, at its highest expression of itself. And so this is supporting it as well. So we know that there could be a lot going on in the situation. Your fears, your anxieties, your desires, what you want to accomplish could be amping things up to where your head's just going around and around and around and around and around and around and around. The Ace is coming in and saying, yes, let's get some clarity here. Let's bring this down a notch. And in many ways, I see these kind of going like this, where the Ace is trying to clarify it. And we've got to bring the energy of the nines down so that we've got this good space of being able to see the situation logically. So for whatever reason, in terms of the sale of the house, you need to make sure that the other energy, the other concerns aren't amplified. Even your hopes and your desires and the things that you want aren't amplified, that you deal with what's actually there to deal with and process through things a lot more logically and clear. There. So this is how I would read this. And I think it's a good example because it shows that both of these are amplifying the central card, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're both positively amplifying it. That's two separate things, and it depends on the situation at hand and the cards at hand. So there we have that. hopefully that helps in some way. You know, we can, you know, when you have so much sword energy in a situation which we have to make decisions, it really does, you know, kind of show that how we can get stuck on mental merry-go-rounds, and that isn't always useful when we're really trying to navigate our way through things. There's a point in which we have to clarify things, you know, go in one to react. This is like, you know, that's if this is my significator, this is very much like my shadow significator. The Nine of Swords is a problem that I'm on a continually basis dealing with, and it's both positive. It lets me get a lot of things done. It lets me process a lot of things mentally. I am very happy with my brain and the way that it works, but it's also my biggest enemy as well, where I can get caught in the merry-go-round. So these are definitely my two significator cards. Okay, so let me scroll back up here. Lenore says, I have to manage someone who is very defensive and doesn't communicate well. And so that's a good question. So what is some advice from the cards on how to manage somebody who is not communicating well and seems to be defensive in the way that they're communicating or listening, or however that might be, right? So let's give these a good shake up here. Oops. This is a definitely, I will say, I have what I consider to be large hands for a female. Not, they're just, I have long fingers, but Baba Studio decks are a stretch for riffle shuffling. Luckily, they're beautiful, you know, almost, my opinion, perfect cardstock, so it helps. But definitely, if you have tiny hands, I would say riffle shuffle. You need to riffle shuffle like to the corner. Not that this is about that, but you know, if you have a deck that's larger but with good card stock, you can very often, I'm not sure about this one because it's not that big, but you can riffle from the side. I don't have as much luck with that, and they need to be bigger. That works well for oracle card. But what you can do is riffle the corners, right? So that you are just pulling those corners in, even though you can't riffle the whole thing. That's a really good way to riffle shuffle a larger deck that you still want to be able to riffle shuffle. Okay, back to Miss Lenore's question. She's managing someone who's defensive and doesn't communicate well. You know, what's some advice at how she might be able to approach the situation? So the first card is the Knight of Wands, the second card is the Ten of Swords, and the third card is the World. So this is great because we have a mix of things. So we're going to start always looking at the middle, because in these readings this week, if you work with this, the middle card is the primary card. So the Ten of Swords for me is not the Rider-Waite Smith. So I don't go to, you know, there's a dead person, don't stab the person that you have to manage. The answer is not murder to this situation. The Ten of Swords is kind of tens are always the ending of something, but remember 1 + 0 brings us back to the beginning of something. So it's always the end of one way of thinking and kind of coming to a conclusion that you need to then go back to the beginning and start fresh, right? So that's how I see the Ten of Swords. The Ten of Swords is, well, all of the tens. It is the culmination of something, and then it's always the request to start back to the beginning with the 1 + 0. So one thing that this says is, you know, just in very, you know, blunt sense, like Lenormand-esque type sense, is that what you're doing isn't working. And so you kind of have to put a cap on that and start fresh. Like there's got to be a way to sort of push the reset button on the way in which you're communicating with this person, that it's not working as it is. And I don't see that as a negative, right? So I don't see the Ten of Swords as a negative card, but in this situation, you know, that's what it feels like. It's like, okay, you're approaching it in this way that isn't working, right? So it's time to sort of stop what you're doing and go back to the beginning and start over fresh and figure out a way, even if that's literally communicating, because swords are about air, which is about the mind, it is about the mental space, but it's also about the way in which we communicate that outwardly. And so it may even be that sense of sitting down with communication, like, okay, this hasn't been working. Let's reset this. Let's refresh things here for a minute. So it may come down to also communicating that reset, like, okay, let's stop bumping our heads here. Let's kind of reset, refresh here with the 10 of Swords, right? So then we're looking here to the left, and we're seeing that we have a wands. So fire and air, again, remember, look at your chart here. They support each other. Fire is an active element, air is an active element. Traditionally, fire is masculine and air is masculine. And so those energies support and strengthen each other. It's not amplifying. That's kind of how I see the difference personally between fire and fire, air and air. That actually amplifies the energy, whereas these energies are strengthening and sort of supporting that energy as it is. So we have the Knight. So we know that this card is going to be something that supports sort of because again, in terms of order of operations, I've already decided what this card means for me in this reading, in this context, what I just talked about, how it's time to sort of reset the energy. It's time to sort of stop what you're doing now because it's not working and really come at this in a fresh way. And maybe even communicating that let's reset, refresh here. I've already said that this is what this means. Whatever comes next is not going to change what I just said in terms of, I'm not going to flip it on the head and say, oh, wait a minute, no, don't do that. This is now going to be read through the lens of the question and through the lens of this main card here. So now we have the Knight of Wands. Knights are about actively pursuing, right? They aren't just waiting and seeing how the situation is going to pan out. They're not just waiting and seeing, and just sort of sit, because sometimes that's the answer. You know what? Just pause for a minute and don't do anything. But this is not that kind of card. This is a active pursuit card, and it is a Knight of Wands, and wands are about transformation and change. So you're actively pursuing change. So this isn't a time to just wait and see and let things die down. You need to be actively pursuing communication and resetting and coming at things a different way. So that's how I would read that second card. It supports it, and the meaning of the card supports the meaning that I already established in the reading. You have to trust yourself. If you're doing a reading and this card means something to you in that moment with that question on the table, you don't want to go and second guess and sort of to get in your own way. You're supporting yourself that this is what this means in this reading, and this card is coming in and supporting that in some way. It's not going to turn it on its head. Hopefully that makes sense. So now these two things are at play. This third card isn't going to change what I just said. It's going to give us more information here, right? So now we have the World card. You again have your, I'm assuming that the World card is Earth. And yes, it is over here in Earth. I would certainly see that as Earth. It's all four elements in play. And that makes a lot of sense to me that that would be an Earth card, right? So now we have earth and air, right? So here we have our air, here we have our earth. Oops, I'm frozen. To me, I'm frozen. So I'm going to pause a second because I can't even see chat. Let me scroll down here. You might still be talking about the Tildwick, but I see, I see stuff down here. So I'm going to go, I'm going to see questions. I'll come back to those. Okay. All right. Some of it is people shopping, so I'm going to ignore you and stay here. So remember, take out your chart here. So if you have this chart here, this is going to really help you. And then you have this chart here, which is going to help you if you don't know what those are. This is also a good time, though, to think about it. Like if the World card comes up, what does that mean to you? Like before you look at the chart, what would, if you were to put the World in an elemental position, what would it be? And then check what the traditions are and then decide which one you choose, right? It makes sense to me that the World is an Earth card. And that also is uplifted in terms terms of the traditions as well. So when you look at your chart, air and fire, earth and air weaken each other, right? So the world card here is could come in and weaken this. Okay, well, what would that mean? That would mean that I would probably look, again, we're not using reversals, but I would probably look at this card more in its shadow aspect, that it's bringing up some sort of a shadow energy here. So the world card for me is about a sense of completion. It's about things all being in harmony, all things being working together in harmony. That's not the case in this situation. We know that's not the case. Given her question, we know that that's not the case. So we don't want to just wash our hands of the situation and leave things as they are. That would be the wrong way to approach it. That would weaken what you're trying to achieve, to just let things stand. So I like these two things in juxtaposition of each other, because one is saying you need to actively pursue changing the dynamics of this situation. You don't want to just allow things to continue forward as they are, because that is going to weaken and drag down what you're trying to accomplish, right? So you can use these elemental dignities as a way of knowing whether you're looking at a card in terms of its light aspect or its shadow or negative aspect of the situation, and whether, how is it doing? This one is supporting this one's pulling this down a little bit, and so we want to focus our energy on what's supporting that energy versus what might. So it gives us an idea of what might stall the situation, because it's going to weaken the trajectory of what you're trying to achieve by this main card. So in terms of the reading, this is not a time to let things just be. This is a time to actively pursue and engage, resetting the situation and starting at it at a completely different direction than you're at the moment. Okay, so that would be that example with Lenore's question. I wish you so much luck. Dealing with people's communication styles is not always easy. Okay, let me go up here real quick and make sure that I answered the questions. The world card in terms of the context of the reading, or the world card in terms of the meaning of the world card? I'm going to scroll up here for a second while you clarify that. Miss Nanda says, when you're laying their meanings, in which order do you, oh, I think, for example, with this one, integrating the mythical creatures. Yeah, truthfully, I know that is very personal. That's a good question. That's very personal to each person. And I would say this depends also on your experience level. If you are new to reading tarot, you should really be working on sort of your foundations of what the cards are. There are different types of readers, and there is not, again, a right way to do it. There are readers who are what they call, and I don't really like this term, but there is a term of being intuitive readers. You don't read divination without being intuitive. Like, everything that you do for divination is intuition based. That is also about Lenormand. I hate, one of my pet peeves that people say Lenormand has nothing to do with intuition. If you are doing readings, you are working with your intuition. So all reading is intuition based. But what they mean is an intuitive reader will pull up this world card, and they will look at they may not even care what the meaning traditionally of the world card is. They will just say, okay, well, here I've got a dragon in the middle, and the dragon is eating its tail. I'm going to think about what that might mean to me in terms of the reading itself. Okay, well, there's an eagle over here. Here's these animals. And they're using the imagery of the cards to come to an intuitive meaning of the card without ever really studying. The goal would be to maybe not even ever learn what traditional meanings for tarot are, and you're just reading off of the image. Like, that would be the extreme end of intuitive reading. The more normal style of, I think, of intuitive reading is that you understand the base of the cards, but you also use the images on the cards to add a layer into the reading itself. Then there's people like me who are the world card is a world card. It's a world card. I don't really care what the image is on the front of it. It doesn't matter to me what's being depicted on the card. The card means the same thing. However, with the caveat that in the midst of reading with different decks, nuances will come out. There may be something, especially say in this deck, where, you know, I might think about, you know, what the mythological story is in the particular deck, and that might add another layer, but that would, for me, come at the very end of my layers, right? So anything that I pull off of a card image would come after I've already established the meaning of the reading and the meaning of the cards. That's just my personal style. The Four of Cups is a Four of Cups is a Four of Cups. I don't care. It literally can have the word on, you know, on the deck. So for example, this is my deck that I'm working on, my sample copy. There's no images on this. This is a tarot deck, among other things, but it just has a title. That sun, that's not the actual sun because that's the other one, but let's get a major arcana. The justice card is a justice card is a justice card. I don't need an image on a card. It's not going to change what the justice card means to me, right? And that's a great practice. If like if you're really starting to want to really nail in sort of your meanings, get a set. You can go on Amazon and get a set of blank tarot cards or blank playing cards, and just write, you know, the names of the tarot cards onto the thing, or print a set off on paper and cut those out, because, you know, for your foundation, it shouldn't matter what the image of the card is. Now, that's a layer that's your foundation. And that doesn't, there are people, I have listened to people, I've read in books where people will say, if you learn tarot, like if you learn the meanings of tarot, it is going to interrupt your intuition and you're not going to be able to read intuitively. That is a lot of bull-hooey. That is not true. Having knowledge does not interrupt your intuition. It gives you a source to draw from for your intuition to play with, right? And so having a foundation of knowledge is not going to stop you from being an intuitive reader. It gives you a foundation so that if you're in the middle of a reading and you're really flowing with that intuitive and you're reading it and you're doing your thing and it starts to get muddled and messy, you can stop and say, okay, wait a minute. let me go back to justice here. Justice is da, 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 and then you can start to rebuild yourself back up and kind of get your footing again. It's a diving board. It's a springboard for your intuition. It is not going to block your intuition. I know I just went off on a rabbit trail, but that's another pet peeve of mine. But the answer to the question is that that there are different kinds of readers. But for me, the base is, what does justice mean? I don't care what the image is. What does justice mean? And then I'm going to, you know, go through that process, and I might be pulling up, you know, I know what the meaning of particular cards in Rider-Waite-Smith. I might pull that in a little bit because people understand that and explain how that might be working at play. There may be something in the image that jumps out and says, okay, that's really interesting. You know, in this particular deck sees it this way, and that provides a nuance. It never is going to change the way I read the card, but it might provide a nuance. And I wouldn't pull something in like, for example, this deck, or say a fairy tale deck, that there are fairy tales associated with the cards. That would be the last layer of things that I would pull into the reading just to be of interest here, if that makes sense. So hopefully, Nanda, that makes, and it is very personal, right? Another person, they want that hit of the image first, and they're going to go to that hit, and then they're going to start to backtrack into the base meaning of the card. And that's perfectly valid. That's the way that they're going to process it. So we're all going to process those things differently. Okay, let me go back here to Ava here. So in context, okay, so she's talking about in context of this. Okay, so let me, do I still have, probably not, probably. So it was the 10 of, here we go. So it was the 10 of Swords, and it was this is the way it was. So I think what Miss Ava is asking is, go back to how I would see the world in this context. So the world for me is about completion, right? It's the very last card of the major arcana. And so it is everything coming into completion. Everything is balanced. Everything is as it should be, in terms of the card of the world card. But Oops, wait a minute. Okay, let me pause here. I just disappeared on my windows. There we go. I swiped and it disappeared. Let me put these away. So I don't do that. So in the context of elemental dignities, traditionally the world card is earth and traditionally it says air. And so we're looking at this as weakening this. So I'm going to look at the world card not as, this isn't the future card of the situation that says everything's going to work out fine, don't worry about it, right? That's not where we're not doing a past, present, and future. We're looking at this card being the main piece of information that you want to gain. And these cards are either supporting that or it's a negative here that we need to be aware of. And so that's how this reading functions. So in this case, because earth and air are earth and air are enemies, so to speak, they are going to weaken each other. I'm going to look at this card in terms of that shadow, that it would be complacent for me to just sit and allow things, or for Miss Lenore to just be complacent and to allow things to be as they are. This is just what it is, right? This is the completion of it. This is how things are going to be, and there's nothing I can do about it. That's how I would probably see the world card in context to this question, because we're looking at the elemental dignities, and we're looking at this in shadow because of the context of the way these are interacting. And so my message to Lenore would be, that's not the way to go. That's going to weaken your situation. If you just allow things to stand and be as they are, that is not going to help the situation, versus actively pursuing change and transformation is actually going to support what you're trying to accomplish in the situation. Hopefully that makes sense, Miss Ava, or answers your question there. Let's see, let me go back. Leah had a question. The Emperor is fire and the King as Little Emperors is fire. Again, if you read the Emperors as fire, that is debated. Some people see them as air, and then that would change that as well. I'm curious about the Empresses being earth, but queens as little empresses as water. Right. So I don't know how traditionally this happened. My guess is, so this is why you really do want to, if you're going to pursue this, right? And you look at the elemental dignity, if this system, if the idea of the elements interacting in this way intrigue you, then you have to do the work of figuring out where you're going to land with this, because we're pulling this from esoteric knowledge that people were discussing, right? This is no Bible that says this is the way this must be, right? This is a way in which a bunch of probably men were sitting in a room discussing elemental dignities, probably associating it with their astrological correspondences and coming up with, this is the way in which we will elementally determine the majors, right? That's useful in terms of a historical context, but it doesn't bind us to that. Like, we are not bound by those decisions of these particular people and deciding that. Now, if this is your magical tradition, then probably it will bind you a little bit more than me, who it doesn't bind me whatsoever, right? So if the idea of seeing the cards interact this way, you are going to have to do the work of sitting down and saying, okay, that makes sense to me. The Empress, she has, the Empress and the Emperor are in control of their environment, of their world in differing ways. And so we're going to place those as earth, right? The queens, then you might say, oh, well, maybe I see the queens as earth. I still see the queens as water, and there's space for those things to be different. So for example, if I change the kings to being air, which I think you could make an argument for, I can still see the Emperor as fire and bring that energy into play as well. They don't contradict each other in as much as you just need to determine what they are and apply that consistently, if that makes sense. We're kind of bringing different systems together, and how you choose to use that, I don't think it's necessarily always going to make sense, other than the fact that you have to come to that sort of idea of how you're going to place them. Let me see. Let me make sure I may not have answered that well enough, and I'll readdress. I'm just going to kind of, as I roll down here, I'm going to see if I miss anything. Chris stays away from intuitive too. It's too loaded. Yeah. And again, everybody's intuitive. If you're looking at cards and coming up with a message, your intuition is at work. I just think it's ridiculous that people, I just don't think it's possible to read divination without some degree of intuition. Yeah, it's both for sure. But for me, reading is very, very logic based because I've had people that know me like in real life outside of divinatory world, and they've been like, how can you be a person that's into all this crazy stuff, right? They look at that and they say like, how on earth are you a tarot reader? Like you're so like logic minded and scholarly based in terms of research and blah blah blah. Like they like that those two things can't exist together. I think they exist together very, very well. And it's both for sure. Okay, let me scroll down here. I'm a visual readers is a good one. I think that makes more sense to me than an intuitive reader. Visual readers meaning you're using the visual cues. So that makes a lot of sense. I do like that better. Lenore is still focusing on murder not being there. She's a little disappointed that the cards didn't say just go in and slay. That's pretty funny. Okay. Elements for, yeah, and it could be a combination. Like elements are involved in the Rider-Waite-Smith system, right? We do have in the system of Rider-Waite-Smith very much. I would imagine, and I can't promise that, I'll have to look it up, but I would imagine that Benabel Wen talks about elemental dignities in the holistic tarot. My guess is that's the case. And that is very much based off of the Rider-Waite-Smith system. And so they were very interested in these types of things in the Golden Dawn. So this using elemental dignities and using the elements is not outside of it's part of the Rider-Waite-Smith system. For me, the elements plus the numbers is the meaning. So and then anything I do with Rider-Waite-Smith is a layer that's added on differently, but elements are not in opposition to Rider-Waite-Smith, if that makes sense. Okay. Mendy says she absolutely, yeah. I mean, because that's part of the tradition and thought, because again, those are out of they're out of the Golden Dawn. So, the Rider-Waite-Smith system and the Thoth system come from the Golden Dawn and their magical correspondences, their way of seeing the world, their way of adding correspondences, astrological, Kabbalistic, like all the things that's coming from the Golden Dawn ideology. And so, and all of this that we're talking about is in that throes of when in the 1800s, certainly late 1800s, certainly early 1900s, in which all of these magical societies were really in high gear, and everybody was, again, sitting around and having these sort of conversations and trying to figure these things out and the way things work. So it's very much part and parcel to diving deep into the Rider-Waite-Smith system. For somebody like myself, I don't correspond to the Golden Dawn ideology necessarily. And so the Rider-Waite-Smith isn't my system. I understand it, I can teach it, I can work with it. It is a layer because I understand the traditional meaning, and it is very much inherent in modern decks, and you can't get away from it in modern decks unless you're using straight pip decks. But it's not my base, it's not my foundation, which would have been much more Marseille based in the sense of the book that I learned to read off of, which was very number based and suit based. And again, playing card divination is very suit and number based. And so it's not my foundation, but it's a piece of the whole puzzle. So yeah, exactly, Miss Tiffany. And people, you can do both. I think and I do both. I reference Rider-Waite-Smith meanings. There are some that I absolutely love. Some of them I have to adjust because they don't work in the way that I see things. But I think in the end, I know Miss Tiffany is one of those newer to tarot than some people. And so, yeah, your brain should be a free-for-all right now. Like you're trying to figure out where are you going to land, and that's the fun. Like I would enjoy that. It can be overwhelming, but at the same time, you're like kind of free to figure out like what resonates, what doesn't resonate. This works, this doesn't work, and it's just a playground right now. And it should always stay a playground, but it's most especially is now. And enjoying that is amazing. And you can come to some amazing ways of reading and ways of coming to ideas about particular cards because you have that beginning energy to the mind, and you don't have a lot of the layers put in there, which is a wonderful space to be in. Messy, but wonderful. Okay, let me scroll back up here real quick. And I think somebody else had a question, but I think there's one more up here that I want to... I might have lost the original questions. I'm trying to see. Here we go. Here's Lenore. Okay. Rafe has a question. Is it time for me to stop buying tarot decks? I'm pretty sure that the tarot is going to be biased to this situation. And I would lay out 3 playing cards to answer that question for sure. There's always room for one. Depends on what your pocket's telling you. Maybe you should ask your wallet. That would be the best place to ask that one. Chris had a question up here. Do I have more to fear or worry about from a person who was a recent major unexpected threat to our household? Will my binding spell, so he's already done some work, continue to hold, or can the sneaky, okay. So let's pull that. Let's pull a new deck here, just because it's fun to play with decks. Stick that one over here. And let's take this one, which is the Tarot of Prague. This is a very Rider-Waite, it's one of my favorite Rider-Waite-Smith decks. Like, this is a very Rider-Waite-Smith deck, but I think it is absolutely beautifully done. And I love the corner, like playing card corners. That makes me incredibly happy. So I do really love this deck as a like just kind of straight Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Do I have more to fear? So does Chris have more to fear or worry about a person? He's done some work already. He's, you know, set his boundaries, set his things in place. So he's done the work that needs to be done. You know, is there more that he has to worry about? Are there gaps? Are there holes? You know, what does he need to be aware of in terms of this situation? I could literally just set and shuffle a Baba Studio deck just for Zen purposes. You know, people ask me a lot. They're like, oh, they're so expensive, and they are. Like, they are definitely my most expensive decks, but the quality does reflect on the price, I will have to say. Okay, so Mr. Chris, we're looking about whether or not there is more to fear or worry about this particular person. He's done the work, but are there gaps? Are there holes? What's going on here that he needs to be aware of? So we have our first card, our second card, and our third card. And let me get to where I can see, and I'm going to scroll down here. And then Milo has a question here as well. Okay. Let me get a copy of this so then I don't have to come back up here to get that one. Okay. So our primary card here is the Eight of Cups. Now, this is an interesting one because in some ways we're looking at a bit of a yes and no question here, but we're also just trying to suss out the situation. My initial reaction, Chris, I know I can kind of just do what I'm going to do. So I'm going to kind of do my initial reaction, but then try to also say why I would get there. My initial reaction is that there's some more work to do because the Eight of Cups is a movement card. It's a journeying card. It's a going deeper card. So the Cups, the water suit is about our inner power. It's about our inner realm, and it's about going, you know, you're going deep. So as the Six of Swords is a movement card that's sort of moving away. The Eight of Cups is a movement card that's going deep. It's going inward. And so my initial reaction to the Eight of Cups in this position is that you have to go a little bit deeper. I literally get that image of, okay, you've got all these sort of things set, but like there is a, there's underneath, like somebody could tunnel under kind of energy where there's a way through it. So my initial reaction just to Mr. Chris, because I know him and I've read a lot for him, is that there's a little bit more work to do there. And that's why. So I guess that would be the reason why I would do that, is that the cups are again about our inner power. I know that Mr. Chris works in a magical sense. So he works in a power-based way. And the 8 is telling us to master that. The 8 of Cups is a card in terms of Rider-Waite-Smith that is going on that inner journey. And so all of those things together say, you know, there's more work to be done there. Go a little bit deeper with whatever he's done already. So that would be the first thing. So now we're going to be looking at our Death card. So we have Cups, which is water, and we have Pentacles over here, but Death, they have, let's see where they put Death at. They put Death as water, which is interesting because that makes sense. I mean, all of these, like I could make a case for any of these, but you know, if you think about water as being transitional, right? We're born in the waters of birth, and then you think about death as crossing over the river, and there's a lot of connotations of crossing the river. The ferryman, you know, kind of taking us across the river at death. So I can certainly see where Death would be water-based. Is there any other one that I would put it in? I mean, you could make an argument for fire because fire is transformational, and obviously death is a major transformation. So you could make a case for that. I wouldn't see death in air. You could also see it in earth, like, you know, we're born of earth and we go back to the earth, you know, dust to dust kind of connotation. I actually think I like the connotation of death as water. It makes sense to me, and that's in terms of these readings, we're using this, but that's kind of how I would process it for yourself. Okay, here's death. Where would you put that? Why would you put that there? What makes the most sense to you? And then adjust it. These are just a bunch of men saying how this should be. Again, nothing against men, but at the time it was a bunch of, you know, probably wealthy men sitting around deciding, you know, these types of things. We're not beholden to that in right now. Like, sit down and do the work yourself and figure that out, and feel free to move about as you want to move them about. But at some point, come to a solid place in which you're going to land if you're going to use it. So I'm going to go with this as water. So we have death actually supporting this. Okay, well, what does death mean in this situation? I'm not just going to look at death and say, oh yeah, Chris, watch out. You know, death is coming, because as seeing death as just inherently a negative card. We want to process, what does death mean? Well, death means the end of something and the starting of something new. So Chris is asking in what in some ways is a practical, yes, it's magical base in terms of energetic base, but it's also a practical, and like he's got this practical situation. So we're not looking at death as the Grim Reaper coming forward. We're looking at how does this relate to the question. So what I see is that he has put an end to something, but it just means there's something else that's then following and starting, because death is never the end of something. It's the end of something and it's the beginning of something new. So it feels to me like he's squashed one thing, but something else is going to start up, and he's got to go deeper, because water and water is amplifying it. It's amplifying the need for him to go deeper and do a little bit more work there. So I would say that this amplifies that, and that one thing may be done, and this could be, let's be honest, an emotional fallout. So if the way that he worded the question, this wasn't something that he was expecting to have this problem from somebody. This came out of nowhere and probably hit like a freight train, and he's done the work that he has to do, maybe to, you know, deal with the situation in person and or magically or whatever he's done, but there's probably still fallout here of like having an unexpected attack, so to speak, from somebody he didn't expect. And so there may be emotional work that has to be done. So this could be literally just talking about, okay, you've kind of done the thing, but now you've got to do this other part of the work. So he'll be the one that knows whether he actually needs to do some more things, because she could still, or he or she could be a problem. or, you know, whether or not this is just he needs to do some emotional work. My intuition tells me that there's actually some actual other work that she could still be a problem. I don't know why I keep saying she. I don't know if you said she or not. Excuse me. So on this side, we have earth. So earth and water are both traditionally in Western elements, feminine, a receptive energy. So these two are supporting each other. Again, if you look on your spectrum here, you have water, you have earth, and those things strengthen each other. And the reason why is because in Western elements, they are both receptive energies, and so they support each other, right? So here we have the Six of Pentacles coming in and supporting what Chris is going to try to do here, whether that's an emotional work that needs to be done, or whether that means he actually needs to do some more work to remedy the situation. The Six of Pentacles is coming in and supporting that. So the six for me is a number of harmony, right? We know the ghost card for the Six of Pentacles is the Five of Pentacles, which is a disruption in the physical world. And the six is coming in and is harmonizing that out. We know from what Chris has already told us that there was definitely a big disruption. The six is coming in and harmonizing that and balancing that. The Six of Pentacles is also the card of reciprocity of energy, right? What we put out, if we expend a lot of energy, we need to replace that energy and pull that in. So in energetic, especially with magic, again, favorite Six of Pentacles, Google the Margaret Peterson, feet on the ground, hands on the ground. The feet on the ground are drawing energy up from the earth. Hands are putting energy out. And that needs to be somewhat in balance. If we're expending a lot of energy, we've got to draw energy back in. So he might need to literally root and ground his energy and make sure he's refilling that energy cup versus just getting drained by the situation. I also love the I always say it's the sassy burrito, but the Cicerabito, is that what that's called? Where I think there's like a line that's coming between. I love that imagery. I'm not a fan of the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith image of like rich people giving money to poor people, because that to me defeats the purpose. For me, it's an exchange, right? If I have more, yes, I might be giving that, but I'm also gaining something from those people as well. And this beautiful mixing of energies that we should have. And sometimes we have extra, so we give it out, but then other times other people have extra and then they're going to give it back to you in different ways. So for me, it's about that equal balance and harmony of energy put out and energy pulled in. So this being in support of this would be a way for him to support whatever work he has to do, would be to make sure that he's sort of refilling his energetic bucket and not going into the next phase of this drained. Yeah, that makes sense too. Chris said a recapitulation exercise might be necessary to reclaim emotional energy that he's got tangled up in it. Because if you're dealing, again, I know Chris, and I know he works energetically. If you're energetically dealing with somebody, even in the work that you're doing to deal with it, at some point you've got to snip that cord. You don't want to stay connected energetically to that person. Whether you think of that symbolically, right? Symbolically, if somebody's a really negative impact on your life, at some point you don't want that connection to still be interacting you. Or if you take it a step further and say energetically, I need to cut that cord because I don't want that that energy to be tangled up. So either way, I think that's the sense. Yeah, that I definitely think the Cicerabito one is amazing. The Eight of Cups is mastery of emotion. So why going deep instead of staying unemotional? Because mastery for me, well, again, this is just the way I read it, so you can read it that way. But for me, mastery of emotions is not being unemotional. It's about knowing how to deal with your emotions, right? To dealing with them in a sense of mastery in a masterful way, which means you've got to go in. So if our emotions symbolically in tarot are speaking of the inner world, and the cups are speaking to our inner world and our inner power. If you are going to master those, you're going into that place of power. You're not going away from that. So oftentimes you'll even see in the imagery where they're going to the moon, which makes a lot of sense, like climbing into that inner space. I like the juxtaposition of the climbing, but you're actually going inward. Sometimes you'll see like mermaids or mer creatures like going down into the depths of the water, which works as well. But for me, mastering emotions isn't being devoid of emotions. It's dealing with those emotions, which means going to the scene of the crime, so to speak, or the place of power in this case. So yeah, so that's that there. I know that I copied it, so I'm going to paste this in here. I hope this works. Let's see. So I didn't have to go back and find it. And I believe this, oh, I sent that directly to Rafe because she had sent me a direct message. So sorry, but now I can see it. I believe this was Milo's. And I think he might have had to leave, but he can see this afterwards. Without going into too much detail, what's the energy around my body health lately? Being tired a lot with fatigue and sleeping problems. So this isn't, and I don't think he's actually here, but this is a good place for my spiel. I don't read for health purposes. That's something I think is perfect use of tarot, but it would be a personal use of tarot. As a professional, and some say, and this is just because some people are wanting to go professional, so I always like to throw this in here. So I appreciate when I have the opportunity to. Some states in the United States, some places, it's illegal to give health advice through tarot readings. It depends on, always know your state laws, always know your country laws. In some places, giving legal advice, giving financial advice, or giving health advice when you're not a doctor, lawyer, financial, whatever would be the equivalent of that, can be illegal. And so you do need to make sure of that in your areas. Then some people have ethical considerations. So I will do health readings for myself. I will do health readings for my family members because I can turn around and nag them to go to the doctor and like do the things that they need to do as well. And I know what they're doing. Whereas if it's a person coming to me, and this is not Milo, this is just using it as a stepping stone. But if a person, the client is coming to me for a health question, I don't know them, I have no connection with them whatsoever outside of the reading. I don't know if they're going to take just that reading and run with it and not go get medical health. And so I have, my own personal qualms about that as well as legal qualms. So if you're going into readings professionally, and or if you're reading for somebody else, even not professionally, taking the time to think about those things, think about where in your country, how does that lie, where do your own personal feelings about that lie, and then making sure that you're clear about that. Like if you're a professional reader, that's very clear on your site that you don't do health readings or you don't do finance. Like if somebody comes to me and asks me a question about an investment, I legally can't answer that, number one. And number two, I wouldn't. Would I do that for a friend or a sibling? Probably so, because I think it's a useful question, but it's not something that I would do professionally, right? And so figuring those things out for yourself as a reader for yourself and as a reader for others, and then step that further into being a person who's taking money for readings as a professional reader, you need to sit down and figure those things out. What do you feel about the future? How does that affect the way that you read? Do you do health readings? Do you do readings for other people? Like if somebody comes and says, is this person cheating on me? Do you do that reading for them because you're actually reading the other person, not the person requesting the reading? Those are all things that you want to step through and figure out how you feel about those and how you approach those, right? Now, one of the things that this question is good at is that I do have people that I read for that are professionally that are in health situations, right? They're in a bad situation in terms of there are health problems going on, but we do focus the reading on how can they manage that in an energetic sense, or what's going on like energetically that might be impacting this that I can kind of utilize in conjunction with the health, right? So that's this kind of stuff that you've got to figure out. Like, are you going to diagnose somebody health-wise? You can get questions like that. Am I pregnant? Am I going to get pregnant? Those are fraught with so many emotions and so much trauma that is often behind those types of questions, that approaching those, and do you say, no, I don't do any questions related to pregnancy? Or do you say, no, I can't tell you whether or not you're going to get pregnant, but I will sort of give you some help and some support as you manage the situation that you're in. Or somebody is in cancer treatment. I'm not going to tell you whether you should do this treatment or not do this treatment, but I could do a reading for you on how to best support yourself in the midst of this, right? So you've got to take the time to process those things through and figure out how you're going to do it. So again, this wasn't about Milo's question. It's just, I like to grab that opportunity to make sure that people who are readers of any divination system are thinking about those things, both personally, if you're reading for friends and family, and or when you take that step forward into reading profession, then it becomes needing to do your research about your area. But what we can do, and Mr. Milo actually worded this well in terms of what's the energy that is around him that may be impacting that health. So he may have other health things that are going on, but energetically are the things that are impacting it as well. So that's how I would approach that. And again, I just used him as a stepping stone for that spiel that I always like to get in these readings or in these classes. Okay. So let's just take a look, like energetically, what could be going on around Mr. Milo that may be contributing to that, so that he can, we can kind of see how would we read that way. And that's very often, and 9 times, I would almost say 10 out of 10 times, because what I'll do in that situation, like let's say a client comes to me and says, I'm really exhausted, like what's going on health-wise? Or like I've definitely had people say, my doctor is saying that I should do this particular treatment. Should I do this? Or the pregnancy question, I'm having infertility problems. Am I ever going to get pregnant, right? So anytime those questions come in, or again, relationship, is this person cheating on me? Almost, I would say almost 100, I can't think of an instance in which I didn't come back and say, and again, you come back with respect. These are people in a difficult situation, and you come back and just explain, this is a reason why I can't. Either it's illegal in my state, I can't give medical advice. I can't give, I have definitely had multiple people come with, I've got this opportunity to invest. Should I invest? And, I cannot, so then you come back and you say why you can't do it that way in a very respectful way. And then say, but I can do this, like we can reframe it this way. If you would like me to reframe it this way, I will. If you would prefer, we can cancel the reading because it's not a reading that I can do. I would say 9.9 times out of 10, they just reframe the question and they're perfectly fine with that. So just open it, have that communication with the person that you're reading for. But most importantly, I would say be very respectful, because I've seen this unfortunately in the divinatory world, people are very disrespectful about relationship questions, about people's desire to connect to another human being. Like, oh my gosh, like here's another question about, am I going to find true love? It's like, that's to me very insensitive, and it's very uncompassionate. We are human beings that I think in a natural way want to connect to other people. And if somebody's coming to you like with that very deep connection of just really wanting to be able to connect to another human being, treating that with respect is important, as just being a respectful human being. That was a rabbit trail, but whatever. That always annoys me. It's like whether or not you're going to do that reading or not doesn't matter as much as being respectful. Somebody's not paying for a reading for the fun of it, right? They're paying you to do a reading because it's important to them. And so whatever that question is, treating that with respect, even if you can't do the reading, I think is really important. Sorry, that was definitely a soapbox, but that's all right. That's all right. Let's go back to Mr. Milo and just see energetically what he might need to be aware of as he deals with the situation. The first card is the King of Cups, the Four of Wands, and oops, the bottom one here. So the main card is the Four of Wands. So what's interesting is that, let me go back to his question here. Our energy been feeling really tired and fatigued and sleeping problems. So it's interesting. What the first thing that came to my mind is that he's talking about being fatigued, and he's talking about like needing feeling like he needs a lot of rest. And we have a card that really does speak to that sort of taking a break and taking a rest, right? So the 4 is a number of stability, right? It's a number of, it's not a movement number. It's a number of stopping. It's a number of stability. The Wands, however, is a very active energy. As we're talking about elemental Western elements, fire is an active energy that is pursuing. We're out doing these things. We're adventuring. We're transforming our lives. We're doing with fire. And yet 4 is the card that says, pause for a minute where you're at, right? Stop for a second here. I love the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery for the 4 of Wands, because especially the ones that you often, and in case, and you can actually in this one too, if you look further, like through down the road, you'll see like a castle. Sometimes you'll see the 4 of Wands, and then up the hill, there's a castle that's over there. I really like the imagery of that with the 4 of Wands, because the suit of Wands is so active and it is so transformative. It is kind of really movement based inherently because of the energy. And yet the 4 is like, pause for a minute. That doesn't mean you're done. Same thing with the 4 of Swords. Doesn't mean you're done. You've got to go back out into the world. You've got to go back out on your merry way. There's more to do. There's more energy to pursue. There's more path ahead of you. But right now, stop for a minute and understand where you're at, kind of root yourself in where you're at. So pushing, so the answer to this for me, for Mr. Milo, is pushing through this isn't the answer, right? So whatever's going on here is a energetic stop. It is an energetic pause, and he actually needs to pause, and he needs to kind of sit in that space and kind of see where he's at. I really see the 4 of Wands in a bit of an assessment place. Celebratory, like see what you've achieved, how you've gotten to where you are. It's like a mini judgment card in some ways, where you stop for a minute and assess where you're at, see what you have achieved. Because sometimes when we stop, like if we're really tired and wore out, and we stop for a minute and really see what we've been doing, what we're coming from, we can be like, well, yeah, of course I'm tired. Like, yes, I have a reason to be tired. All of this has been going on. And yeah, I am tired, and I have good reason to be tired. And you can be like, okay, well, I just need to rest with that. Then I need to sit there and acknowledge what I've accomplished here and sit here. But in terms of health, like number 1, this says don't push through this. You need to stop and rest and sort of evaluate this before you move forward. So it's more of that energy around you, like trying to maybe force you to stop. Because I do believe that, I have a friend that's like that. She goes all the time until at some point her body shuts down. She gets sick, something happened, because it's the only way to get her to stop. Like there's a certain point in which your body's just like, you've got to stop and rest, and it kind of, you get in a situation where you're forced to recuperate. And so there's a little bit of that feeling here, that this isn't a time to push through, but this is a time to stop, evaluate why you might actually be tired. What are the things? Go to your doctor, see what are the things that could be contributing, do all the things that the universe expects us to do to figure that out, and stop and rest and allow your body to rest. Don't fight against that. Like, you need the rest there. So in terms of our elemental dignities, here we have fire, here we have water, and water puts out fire, right? So we know that this is the enemy elementally. This is going to pull this down. And here we have the King of Cups. Now, so we're going to look at the King here of Cups in a negative fashion, or in a way that's dragging down on what he's trying to achieve, because we're looking at this water with the fire. So we're going to look at this kind of as a reverse card without using reversals. This is one of the benefits of using this system, is because of it allows us to see what cards are in shadow when we don't have a spread and we don't have we're not using reversals. So the King of Cups in light, right, is somebody who is complete control of their emotions, right? They're not being ruled by their emotions, they are ruling their emotions. They are making good decisions, and they are ruling their inner world and their emotional space. They're not being ruled by it. But when we look at this in shadow, we do see a lot of inner emotional things that may be ruling the situation. So this, and pulling that energy down. So this would tell me that there may be some inner turmoil. Again, Four of Wands, stop and assess it. You want to look at your health situation. You need to look at, in terms of the doctor, to suss any of those things out. You want to look at your just life. Like, is life super busy? Like, what's exhausting you in terms of life? And then in this case, because we have this card here, I would say that there's an emotional component. There's inner things that need to be processed and worked through that might be pulling the energy down, because the water and the fire are enemies, and this pulls the energy down here. So we'd look there. The other side, we have fire we have earth, because this is a pentacle card, and fire. Now, those just neutralize themselves. So if you look at your chart here, fire and earth are just neutral. It's not going to lift it up, and it's not going to help to energize it, but it's also not going to pull it down. It's really not having that much of an effect energetically on this particular message, right? So it kind of ends up standing a bit on its own as a piece of advice. So here we have the 9, dynamic energy, a lot that's going on, right? And we have the pentacles, which is in the pentacle. So that's dynamic energy. We often see this in the Rider-Waite-Smith as being somebody who is in the best position to focus on the things that are important to them, right? They have the money, they have the time, they have the resources to focus on the things that are important to them in some way. But we have dynamic energy in the physical realm. So this would tell me, we already say there's emotional, maybe inner problems that are pulling the energy down, but we do want to at least pay attention to the fact that there's dynamic energy in the physical world. So I would be saying to Mr. Milo, that are there things that are just a lot going on in your physical world that could be, make sense as to why why you might be tired. But I would also say focus on those things that are important to you and let the other things go. Again, that's just like read, what comes to your head when you see a particular card in a question. And so when you're reading cards, it's a combination of what just pops into your head because a card shows up. Like, for example, the Four of Wands, I'm like, oh, it's the card of, take a break card showing up when somebody's tired. Like, that pops in. You're pulling that. You're pulling, okay, well, this is this card and it means this. And you're saying, oh, yeah, I remember this one card pops into my head from a particular deck. Like, think about that. And I will literally say, go Google this particular card because this image popped in my head. And it's all of those things together that ends up giving that whole part of the reading, is all of those different pieces that come into play. So given this, I would be, the main suggestion would be to not push against this. Don't fight resting. This is a time to rest and evaluate, figure out what's going on. Is it, you have perfectly good reason to be tired? Are there health issues? Go through all those things, figure that out. Don't push forward until you figured that out, and allow yourself to rest. There could be emotional things that are pulling things down here. Think about, that inner space and what could be dragging your inner energy down, which is also going to make you tired because of the connotation between the water and the fire. And then be aware of that there could be a lot going on in the physical world that's impacting it. So make sure you focus on the things that are important to you and let some of the other things go. That would be my advice to Mr. Milo based on those particular cards. So hopefully that helps in some way, Mr. Milo, and thank you for letting me use you as a jumping off point to have my spiel about health versus love reading, all those things. So I appreciate it. Chris says, I'm really vibing with letting the elemental interactions cast light or shadow on the card meanings. It helps me be a bit more subjective in my reading and do it quickly. Yeah, I struggle with that, especially with personal readings, especially. So I think seeing those interactions can be more complicated in personal reading. So having something that you can specifically point to can help you get out, take that step back and not let your energetically push and pull the reading. So I do think it allows that to be a little bit stepped back, especially in personal readings where it can be harder. Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely agree. It's definitely worth trying. And again, how much are you going to use this is going to be really dependent on how much this makes sense to you and how much this pops. I think that it also can be in between. Again, I put a lot more credence on the minors in this situation, and I don't use as much the majors, right? And if you think about that in a reading, so like let me try to force this situation. So if I have, a reading, and even let's do it like this, where we have it like this. If I have a majors card, there's two things that you can do. Obviously, you can figure out what your elemental association. If you're like me and I don't pay as much attention to the elementals correspondences to the majors, this is still really useful because I'm still looking at the center card and this supporting that or not, depending on the configuration here. In this case, it would just support it because we have fire and air. Think about what the major arcana is, a major energy that is speaks to a bigger cycle at play than the ones that the minors are doing. So having this sort of stand alone, and it has a bit of emphasis and umph by itself because it's a major, is fine. And so I would probably do this reading, pay attention to the way that's interacting, and this kind of stands out as its own, as letting me know that there's a major energy that's at play here, and what is that all about here, right? So you can just do that if you want, or you can then again look at if you're going to see this in light and shadow by paying attention to the energetic correspondence to the major card. Or let's say you had a major up here and you have your two minors, you can cross these, and Mathers talks about this. I will try to remember to put the Mathers link that Mendy found where you can actually read it yourself. Link to Benebolin PDF. They go into a lot more where you can look at how these two cards are interacting, because he will literally look and say, okay, if this was, say, fire and water, these two cards cancel themselves out. You don't even read those cards, and all the emphasis just stands on the card in the middle. I don't do that. Again, if a card's on the table, it's there for me to read it, and I always read it. Same thing with runes or anything like that. So that's just my particular style. But there are ways of reading in which you can, you're looking at the interaction of these two cards, right? So if we have the majors and we're people that don't pay attention to the element of the major, then we can look at these two and say, okay, well, these are kind of at odds. So we've got this major thing going on, and now these two cards are in some way at odds with each other. So how do those two cards that being at odds with each other impact this big situation that is at hand, right? So there's ways to use parts of this idea of understanding the way that elements do interact with each other, and understanding that when we combine that with the particular situation, that could be fortunate or unfortunate depending on the situation at hand. And I really do think if you give this, at least practice this and try this a few times, whether you end up using it in your daily practice or not, I think it will, as the point or the takeaway for me is that it's another way for you to be reminded that these cards are not sitting here nice and neatly in their own little compartments, but they are interacting with each other, just like the energy of the situation is interacting with each other. And so just trying to break your brain away from the first step, which is the first step, and you've got to go there. We all have to be at that first step of here's this card and it means this, here's this card and it means this, here's this card. That's a step everybody has to go to until you get really comfortable there. But then we want the cards to start to talk and to start to interact. And seeing the major arcana as a story helps us do that. Seeing ghost cards helps us do that with the numbers, and seeing the way that the elements interact can also do that as well. And so that's kind of the point of looking at this. So I hope that this helps and doesn't hinder. I have in the past had this be one of those things where people are like, oh, no, like that just does nothing for me. Like that just hurts my brain. And, you know, that's fair. You know, that just may not be the tool that goes in your toolbox, but take it as a takeaway that everything is interacting just as everything is interacting in the physical world. And I think that it will at least have, you know, have that to its benefit and aid in your kind of seeing tarot as this vibrant system that is showing us all of what we're seeing in the outer world on the table, and can really allow us to get in there and figure out what's going on in particular situations. So okay, I hope that makes some sense. Again, you may have questions, like people have asked some great questions already. If you're in the course of working with this and you get stuck on something, A, put it up in Discord, B, email it to me. Again, don't respond to the link of the class. You know, when I send you the link tomorrow, if you respond to that, that gets really convoluted. Like, send me a separate email. You know, that as well, because also those are things that I can or save it up, you know, write the question down so that next week we can go over that after you've got a chance to try it. You might have different questions than you might have right now, and we can go back over and try to make sure we answer those questions, because again, if you have a question, I promise you one other person has thought the same thing, and it's going to be useful to answer that question. I think this solidified my somewhat ambitious use of elements. Well, excellent. Yes, that is a good thing. Okay, let me go over here so that I can. I do have and I'll put another, and I don't know if it actually would be helpful. It'd be interesting to know now, because obviously I've been working with this a lot. Okay, I'm trying to get back to Zoom so I can see you guys. Okay. Ambiguous. Oh, well, you know, you were ambitious to fix the ambiguity, maybe of the things. I do have a video, I think, on my YouTube channel about elemental dignities. Obviously, that was definitely a while ago, so maybe I will have to re-watch it and see if it's helpful or confusing. But now, you know, I've used it for a while, so I will have to. I'll take a look at it and send the link there too, that it might at least be more concise in terms of its, you know, when my hour-long YouTube videos are more concise than a class, that's, you know, that's a scary thing. But anyways, Ellen says, thanks, Kelly. I'm glad to have taught it, so I'm not scared of it. Yeah, and I think that it can look, and this is the case of a lot of sort of older things that we'll see. Like, I personally find like opening of the keys to be really intimidating and really a lot of hoo-ha. That's like really just lay the cards on the table, like just because of my personality type. And so, but when you still, like, I did a lot of work walking through the opening of the keys, which is a Golden Dawn way of like getting to actually laying the cards on the table. I would never use it, right? It's not something that is in my wheelhouse, but I did learn things from being deliberate and having intentions. And there's things that I learned from it, even if I would never do it. And I still look at it and think, like, just lay the cards on the table. Like, it's going to be okay. But same thing with this, where I think that sometimes we see somebody talk about elemental dignities or something like that, and we think, oh, okay, like that's just kind of going off into a random esoteric realm for the sake of talking or exploring, but it's not practical. But there are really practical applications, even if you're not an, you know, again, a ritual magician or something like that, where those things make more sense in your practice. There's still really practical applications to seeing the way that those things interact. So Yeah, I mean, a lot of people love the opening of the key. I just remember the first time I saw it, I was like, I think I saw a video of somebody doing it, and I was literally like, what are you doing? Like, lay the cards on the table. Like, it's not this complicated, like to get cards on the table. But I did, you know, because again, I enjoy learning things. So I went through and really worked it out and, you know, did it and stuff like that. And I learned there were lessons to be learned. And I think it's beautiful. And for some people, that's a primary way in which they put their cards on the table, and that's fabulous. It's not ever going to be my way, but I learned from it. And I think, again, that's with all things, that you may not, you know, do the exact same thing and take this whole practice into your reading, but there may be something about the way the elements interplay that can help and aid you as you read the way forward. Opening of the keys is a process of getting the card. It's a Golden Dawn process of, you know, doing all of these things to end up with cards on the table is the best way that I can. Just Google it. Just Google. I'm sure, I don't know if Benabelle went on her YouTube channel. She might have a video. I'm trying to think if she might have a video on like how to do but I know I've seen videos on how to do an opening of the keys, and I know that it's explained in Holistic Tarot if that's something that interests you. But if I can find, and I'll look to see if there's just for your guys' curiosity sake, opening the keys. We will not be, that won't be what we'll be doing here, but yeah, any of her courses, you know, again, usually they're worth it just for the stuff that, you know, the stuff that you get for it. So it sounds like she might have I feel like I know I watched somebody's video on it too. So I'll see what I can find just so that you can see what it is, just out of curiosity. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to get going because I need to go paint lots of walls at my daughter's house. I feel like at what point do I get to say I'm too old, like get young people to help you move? Because I'm over 50. I don't want to paint your walls. Or I'm not going to last as long as you young people, but I'm going to go and paint some walls. And you guys have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Next week, we will be kind of, you know, answering it's the anything I can think of to throw in there, but mostly we are going to be talking about spreads, like larger spread configurations, processing through a full reading, looking at some larger spreads, and also a bit about how to sort of set up your own spread. You know, if you've got a, you know, again, what are you trying to achieve? Okay, what do you need to do to get a reading that's going to achieve that? So we'll talk a little bit more about spreads and a little bit more about processing the reading sort of from beginning to end. So that's what we'll be doing next week. So I will see you all next week, and yeah, we'll be wrapping up tarot for 2021. All right, see you later. I'm kicking you all out.